Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. All right, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I used to live in a small rental house on the edge of an old apple orchard, the kind of place where the nights were too quiet and the stars always looked a little sharper than they did in town. The orchard was dense and spread out wide behind the house, running downhill into a patch of woods that had probably been there long before the area was ever developed. I lived alone, had a night job managing logistics for a grocery warehouse, so I was used to being awake when most people weren't. The neighborhood was rural, and the house I rented was one of only 3 on that stretch of road. It started on a Wednesday in mid-October. I had the night off and couldn't sleep, so I was sitting in the back room of the house where I had a small desk and my computer set up. The room faced the orchard and the blinds were open. Around 1:15 in the morning, I glanced outside. At first, I thought I saw headlights through the trees, but they didn't move like a car's lights would. They were smaller, dimmer, and they moved low to the ground like lanterns. I stood up and pressed my face to the window. The lights were moving slowly through the rows of trees, evenly spaced. There were 5 of them that I could see, weaving left and right between the trunks, all perfectly in sync. Same speed, same direction, same rhythm. They weren't pointing in random directions like flashlights usually do. They never paused or wobbled. They just glided. I didn't see any figures holding them. No shadows. No beams connecting them to hands. Just the small glowing circles floating between the trees. I watched for about 10 minutes. They reached a certain point deep in the orchard, then disappeared, one by one. The whole thing was strange, but I wrote it off as some kind of prank or maybe weird motion-activated lights. I hadn't walked out there much. The orchard was technically private property, even though it had been abandoned for years. The owner, an older man named Ted, had passed away 2 years ago, and no one had been maintaining it since. The next night, I stayed up on purpose. At 1:17 a.m. exactly, the lights came back in the same spot, same pattern. 5 glowing orbs gliding through the same rows, same speed, same turns. I checked the time on my phone and waited. They vanished after about 12 minutes, just like the night before. The way they moved, it was too perfect. No hesitation. No randomness. By the 4th night, I started to feel unsettled. I couldn't explain why. I hadn't seen anyone go in or out of the orchard during the day. There was no road that cut through it. The only access was a narrow dirt path that ran along the tree line behind my fence, and it had been overgrown with weeds and dead grass for months. I never heard voices, never saw movement during daylight, but every night, 1:17 a.m., the lights came. On the 5th night, I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a closer look. The lights were brighter than I remembered. I could see now that they weren't being carried. They were fixed to something. I adjusted the focus. They looked like they were attached to poles sticking out of the ground, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. But they weren't all turned on at once. One would light up, then the next, giving the illusion of movement through the trees. A traveling pattern. It was like watching a slow motion ripple of light. And then they disappeared again in the exact same way. Something was wrong. I knew it by then. No teenagers were doing this. This wasn't a prank. Someone had arranged those lights deliberately on private land, and they had programmed them to follow a perfect path at the exact same time every night. And no one ever came to check on them. No maintenance, no resetting. Just the lights every single night at the same time, without fail. On the 6th night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to see them up close. I took an aluminum baseball bat from the closet and my strongest flashlight, the kind I kept for power outages. I wore jeans, boots, a hoodie, and gloves. It was cold out. The temperature had dropped sharply in the last few days. My backyard gate hadn't been open in weeks, and I had to push against some brush to get through it. The orchard was quiet. Even my boots stepping on the fallen leaves and soft earth sounded too loud. I could see the lights already, flicking on in sequence about 20 yards ahead, slipping smoothly through the trees. I kept my flashlight off and walked toward them. No animal stirred, no wind, just the silence of sleeping trees. When I got within a few feet, I turned on my flashlight and stepped into the path of the lights. What I saw stopped me cold. There were no people, no huellas, just a line of narrow poles about 4 feet high, each with a small square-shaped light mounted on top. They had motion sensors. I could see the little black eyes of the sensors under each bulb. The moment I stepped into the path, the light nearest to me flicked on, and the next one further down turned on a split second later, then the next, creating the illusion of movement again. Someone had set these up carefully. The spacing was perfect. The sensors were finely tuned. But that wasn't the part that bothered me the most. In the center of the area where the lights always ended, a shallow, circular clearing in the orchard, there was a fresh pile of apple cores. At least 100 of them, still wet. Some looked like they'd been bitten clean to the stem. Others were broken or split. Sitting right beside the pile was a long coil of thick rope, like the kind used for towing or tying down heavy cargo. And on top of the rope was a black coat. Long, heavy, and folded in half. The coat looked used. It had wear around the cuffs, some light fraying at the collar. There were red flecks on the front, dried into the fabric. Not fresh, but visible. My flashlight beam trembled slightly as I moved it around the scene. There were no footprints, no cigarette butts, no beer cans, nothing that would suggest someone had been hanging out here. I checked the apple cores again. They hadn't been dropped randomly. They were arranged in a low, wide mound, like they'd been deliberately collected and placed. I knelt down and touched one. It was soft and still moist on the inside. Some still had bites that looked recent. I picked one up and sniffed it. It smelled fresh. The core I held had teeth marks, human teeth, too big and uneven to be from an animal. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing, just the still, dark trees. I didn't touch the coat or the rope. I wasn't sure why, but something about them felt wrong, like they were part of a trap. I took a few steps back and walked around the perimeter of the clearing. I found no footprints. The dirt was soft from recent rain, but only my own tracks were there. Whoever had been doing this had been careful not to leave a trace. I left the orchard and went back inside. I locked the doors, closed the blinds, and turned on every light in the house. I stayed up until dawn, sitting at my desk, staring out the back window. I didn't see the lights again that night, and when the sun finally rose, I went out again to the orchard. The lights were gone. Every single pole had been pulled from the ground and taken. The apple cores were gone. The rope, the coat, all gone. There were no drag marks, no indentations, no signs of where anything had been. Even the dirt where the pile had been looked smooth and undisturbed. The only thing left was a faint depression in the grass where I had knelt the night before. It was like it had never happened. I walked deeper into the orchard, checking rows at random. Nothing. It was just an abandoned field again. That afternoon, I called the property management company that handled my rental and asked if they knew who now owned the orchard. They said it had been in legal limbo since Ted's death. No one had claimed it, and the paperwork was a mess. No one was maintaining it. No one had legal access to it. No one had reported any activity. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up watching. 117 came and went. No lights. Same thing the next night. And the next. It was over. But I never forgot it. Whoever had set those lights up had done it with purpose. The motion sensors, the perfect timing, the exact path. Someone had planned all. And the apple cores, the rope, the coat, they meant something. It wasn't just for fun. It wasn't random. I moved out 2 months later. Couldn't take the nights anymore. Even with the lights gone, I never felt safe again in that house. Every time the wind blew through the trees, I thought I heard someone walking. Every time I passed the back window, I felt like something was watching from the edge of the orchard. I drove by the place again last summer, out of curiosity. The orchard was still there, overgrown, wild, but I noticed something strange. In the clearing where I'd seen the apple cores, someone had erected a small wooden post. Just one. It looked like it had been there a while. Weathered, old. There was nothing on it. No sign. No name. Just a pole standing in the middle of the trees. I didn't get out of the car. I just drove away, and I haven't gone back since. I had never been inside a house that felt dead before. I don't mean empty or dirty or old. I mean dead. Like whatever life had been inside it at some point had dried up a long time ago and never came back. My friend Mark asked me to help him clean out his late uncle's farmhouse. He inherited it after the man passed away in the hospital a couple months earlier. I hadn't known his uncle. Mark didn't talk about him much, but I got the impression they weren't close. The man had lived out there alone for years. Apparently, he didn't come into town much and didn't like visitors. No wife, no kids. Just a broken down house in the middle of overgrown fields and rotting wood barns. We drove up on a Friday afternoon, his old Ford filled with garbage bags, gloves, and tools. The plan was to spend the weekend clearing the house so Mark could put on the market. I'd helped friends move before. This felt different. I remember thinking that on the drive up. It wasn't like we were boxing up someone's couch or old kitchen stuff. We were cleaning up a dead man's entire life. Whatever he left behind, papers, clothes, maybe stuff he didn't want anyone to find, it would be up to us to go through it. The house sat far back from the road, maybe a quarter mile down a gravel driveway filled with potholes and weeds. The trees around it were so thick the place barely got any sun, even during the day. The paint on the siding had peeled so badly, I don't know what the original color even was. Most of the windows were cloudy, and one was cracked almost from top to bottom, like someone had taken a bat to it. The roof sagged in the middle. There were empty rusted gutters falling off the corners. The porch creaked when we stepped on it, and one of the floorboards snapped when Mark put weight on it. He unlocked the front door with a key that looked like it belonged to a jail cell. The lock stuck at first, and the door made this deep dragging sound as he pushed it open like it was being pulled back by the house itself. The inside smelled like mold, piss, and dust. Not like a fresh mess either. The kind of smell that gets into the wood after years. The air was thick and still. No fans, no vents. The only sound came from the old floor creaking under our feet as we stepped inside. We stood in the living room first. The furniture had sheets over it, all yellowed and crusty at the edges. There were old newspapers stacked in piles on the floor, some so brittle they fell apart when we moved them. The fireplace was filled with ashes and what looked like old nails or maybe bones. I didn't want to look too close. There was an oil painting on one wall, crooked and covered in cobwebs. It looked like some wooded scene, but it was too dark to make out much detail. I took a breath and already regretted it. We started cleaning room by room. Mark gave me the kitchen and dining area, while he started in the hallway that led to the back bedrooms. There were rat droppings on the counters and what looked like dried blood in one corner. The fridge still had food in it. I almost threw up when I opened it. Black mold had taken over the shelves. Some kind of meat had turned liquid in a tray. I slammed the door and dragged the whole thing away from the wall just to unplug it. The rest of the day was like that. Miserable, dirty, and slow. The house had 2 floors. Downstairs had the kitchen, dining room, living room, and 2 bedrooms. Upstairs was just the attic, which we hadn't touched yet. We took breaks on the porch when we couldn't stand the smell anymore. I remember the air outside didn't feel much better. Humid, thick, and quiet. The kind of quiet where you hear every bug, every twig snapping in the trees. No cars, no voices, just that old, forgotten land stretching in every direction. By sunset, we had filled about a dozen trash bags. We rolled out our sleeping bags in the living room. We were too tired to care about beds or the smell. We didn't bring mattresses, just figured we'd crash on the floor, clean a bit more in the morning, and maybe be done by the next day. There was no power. The house had been disconnected from the grid for years. We used 2 large flashlights and a couple battery-powered lanterns. Mark placed one lantern in the middle of the living room and kept a flashlight next to his sleeping bag. I kept mine in my hand, even as I tried to fall asleep. It was hard. The house creaked constantly, like it was shifting under its own weight. Once I thought I heard something like breathing, but I told myself it was just the wind in the vents or maybe an animal in the walls. Then, around midnight, I woke up. I hadn't meant to. It wasn't a slow waking up either. I snapped awake, eyes open, heart already thudding in my chest. I didn't know why at first. I lay there staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to figure out what had changed. The lantern was still glowing softly. I could see Mark rolled up in his bag a few feet away, facing the fireplace. Then I heard it. From above us, up in the attic, came a noise. A long, slow dragging sound. It didn't happen once. It kept going, over and over. Something heavy was being pulled across the floor above us. It wasn't fast or frantic. It was slow and steady. Scrape, pause. I didn't move. I just listened, my body tense. My mind tried to come up with something logical. Maybe it was a raccoon. Maybe an old box shifted from the slope of the house, settling. But it didn't sound like that. It wasn't tumbling or scratching. It was dragging, as if someone was on their stomach up there, pulling themselves forward inch by inch. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. I sat up slowly, still clutching the flashlight. I didn't want to go up there. I really didn't. But I knew I'd never fall asleep again if I didn't at least check. I looked over at Mark. He was still sleeping. I envied him. I got up, walked quietly to the hallway, and stood under the attic hatch. The string to pull it down dangled in front of me. I listened. Nothing. Silence. I pulled it. The hatch dropped with a loud creak, and the wooden ladder folded down. A wave of warm, stale air came down with it, thick with dust. I turned on my flashlight and started climbing. The attic was big, one wide space under the sloped roof, with wood beams crisscrossing overhead. It was filled with junk, old furniture, trunks, rotting cardboard boxes. Dust covered everything. My light cut through it like a fog, but nothing moved. I swept the light left and right. No animals, no open windows, no people. Still, something wasn't right. The dust. There were clear marks in it. A wide path through the grime that started near the back wall and led right up to the attic hatch. It looked like someone had crawled through it. Not walked, crawled. The path was wide and smeared, like elbows and knees had pushed through. And right at the edge, a few inches from where the ladder ended, the trail stopped. Like whoever made it had turned around the second I opened the hatch. I backed down and closed it. I didn't wake Mark. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling until morning. When the sun came up, I told him I wanted to leave that day. He didn't ask why. I think he felt it too, even if he didn't say it. We spent a few more hours boxing up books and clearing out the smaller bedroom. Mark found a photo album full of pictures of his uncle standing in front of the house, sometimes with people, sometimes alone. In the later ones, he was always alone. I kept glancing up at the ceiling. I didn't say anything. When we went to leave, I stepped into the hallway one last time and looked at the attic hatch. That's when I saw it. The dust on the floor, just under the hatch, was a faint pattern of smears and handprints. Not fresh enough to be obvious at a glance, but fresh enough if you were looking. The prints showed someone had come right up to the hatch again. Not from above, but from the attic floor, crawling to the edge. The handprints were spaced wide apart, like the person had been lying flat. And then, in a smudge right near the bottom of the hatch's trim, I saw a faint mark. A finger. Someone, or something, had pressed a finger right against the trim of the hatch, as if listening or waiting. The tip had dragged slightly, like it had shifted when we opened the hatch the night before. I didn't say anything then either. I just walked outside and waited by the truck while Mark locked up. We drove back that afternoon. Mark was quiet. I didn't bring up what I saw, and he didn't bring up anything either. A week later, he told me he put the house on the market. A local guy bought it for the land value, said he planned to tear the house down and build something new. I checked a couple months after that. The house was still standing. No signs of demolition, but the for sale sign was gone. I asked Mark about it once, just casually, and he said the buyer changed his mind. Something about paperwork, or maybe he just lost interest. The next year, the house burned down. No one was inside. Fire department said it was probably vagrants or a faulty wire. I read the news article. They said it burned from the attic downward. Fast too. The roof collapsed in minutes. They never found who started it. There were no squatters, no animals. No one was supposed to be up there. But I remember the sound, that long, steady dragging. And I remember the dust and the path that led right up to the hatch, and then backed away. It was my first real camping trip away from home, and it was with school. I think I was around 11, maybe 12. It was one of those end-of-year things, like a reward trip for not getting expelled or something. We had these giant military-style tents that slept about 7 kids in each, all lined up on hard foam mats, zipped into sleeping bags, some of us with tiny flashlights, others with snacks they smuggled in. The air inside the tent was hot and stale when it was zipped up, but if you left the flap open, bugs came in. It was either sweat or get eaten alive. I remember lying down that first night feeling excited and nervous. Everyone was loud at first, whispering and laughing even after the teachers had told us to quiet down. Eventually, we all passed out one by one. The camp itself was deep in the woods. Not wilderness, but far enough from anything that you couldn't hear cars or city noise. Just trees, bugs, and wind. There was a big open area with a fire pit and some benches, and then the tents were set up a bit further back. The teachers had their own tents on the edge of the woods, and they always stayed up for a while after we went to bed. You could usually hear them talking or the fire popping as they put more wood on it. That first night, I remember falling asleep with the orange glow of the fire leaking through the thin fabric of the tent wall. That and the muffled voices of the teachers just beyond the trees. At some point during the night, I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but it felt late. The kind of late where the air feels colder and the bugs have gone quiet. There was no light in the tent at all, no moonlight coming through the walls. No orange fire glow, no voices. It was completely dark. I blinked for a bit, letting my eyes adjust, but there was nothing to see, just pitch black, and the sound of someone breathing a little loudly on the mat next to me. Not snoring, just deep, even breathing. I laid there for a few seconds, confused, trying to remember where I was. I had that moment of panic you sometimes get when you wake up somewhere unfamiliar. I felt like I was still dreaming. The silence outside was weird. I didn't hear the fire anymore, which made sense, I guess. It was probably out by now. But even the crickets and frogs were quiet, and I remember thinking that was strange. It felt too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. Then I heard it, a noise from outside. Not near the fire pit, not near the tents. Deeper in the woods. Not far, but not right up against us either. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it didn't sound right. It was high-pitched, but not like a bird. It started kind of like a scream, and then broke into this raspy, cracking sort of screech. It sounded like something in pain. Not like a person, not like a dog. It was raw. It felt like it cut through the trees and hit the tent like a physical thing. I froze completely. My whole body went stiff. I didn't even breathe for a second. I laid back down slowly, trying not to make a sound. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me and kept my arms against my chest. I stared straight up, even though I couldn't see anything. My heart was pounding so loud, I was afraid it would wake up the others. I didn't want to move. I didn't want whatever that thing was to know I was awake. It sounded like something that shouldn't be real, like a monster from a nightmare. That screech, it wasn't just loud, it had something in it like hate or pain or something worse. It sounded angry, but also messed up in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't clean. It sounded broken. It didn't come closer, but it did it again. Louder this time, or maybe just clearer. The second time made it worse. It confirmed that it wasn't my imagination. Something was really out there. I want to get up, unzip the tent, look out, but I also didn't. I just stayed there, still. Every time I heard the wind blow through the trees, I tensed up, thinking it was footsteps or something worse. I don't know how long I laid there, but it felt like forever. My muscles ached from not moving. At one point, I thought I heard someone else shifting around in a sleeping bag across from me, but no one said anything. That made it worse. That meant someone else was awake and scared too, but too afraid to speak up, just like me. Eventually, the screech stopped. I don't know how many times I heard it. 3, 4, then nothing. Just silence again. The kind that presses in on you from all sides. I must have fallen back asleep after that, because I woke up to sunlight coming through the tent and the sound of people outside starting breakfast. I sat up slow. My back hurt, and I had a crick in my neck. No one in the tent said anything at first. Just tired looks, people rubbing their eyes. Then someone yawned and started talking about how cold it got. A few of us walked out and sat near the fire pit. The ashes were cold and gray. The fire had been out for hours. The teachers were already making eggs on the propane stove. Everything looked so normal. Bright sunlight, smell of smoke and food, kids laughing and stretching. It felt weird, like the night hadn't even happened. I kept glancing toward the trees. They looked normal too, just trees. Not like the place where that awful sound came from. Later in the morning, when more kids were up, I noticed something. A few of them had the same look I did, like they hadn't slept well. Red eyes, quiet, sort of pale. One of them, a kid from my tent, caught my eye and I knew instantly. He'd heard it too. You don't make eye contact like that if you didn't. A few of us hovered near the teachers and tried to bring it up. Not directly, just hints. Someone finally asked, flat out, if there were animals out here that made weird noises. One of the teachers, the one with the beard, said, "You probably heard a deer." A deer. That's what he said. A deer. And he didn't say it like it was strange. He said it like that was normal. Like deer just go around making noises that sound like the gates of hell opening up. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something about the way he said it, quick and flat like that, made me feel weird. Like he was saying it because it was easier than explaining anything else. Like maybe he didn't know what it was either, or maybe he did and just didn't want to talk about it. I never really found out what it was. But I looked it up when I got home. Deer do make noises, screaming noises, especially does when they're warning others or during mating season or when they're injured. But what I heard didn't sound like a deer. It didn't even sound like it belonged in this world. I listened to a bunch of deer screams online and none of them were like what I heard. Still, that's what the teacher said. A deer. Maybe it was. But I remember how quiet the woods got before it happened. How it felt like the whole forest knew something was wrong. I remember the tension in the air, the stillness, the way my skin felt like it was humming from fear. And most of all, I remember how I didn't move. How I laid there in the dark, not even breathing, while something out there made that noise over and over. And the thing is, even if it really was a deer, I don't think that makes it any better. Because now I know what the woods can sound like when they decide to stop pretending they're safe. I live alone in a small city just outside of Fukuoka, Japan. My apartment is a one-bedroom unit on the top floor of a 3-story building. It's nothing fancy, just a narrow hallway that leads to a small kitchen, then a short step down into the main room with a sliding door to the balcony. I work at a local logistics warehouse, long shifts from early morning to evening. Most nights I come home exhausted, eat something simple, shower, then fall into bed. It's a quiet life. I like quiet. That's why I chose to live alone. About 6 months ago, I started noticing little things that felt off. At first, it was small, nothing big enough to be sure of. A carton of milk I thought was more full. A missing banana. A cup in the drying rack that I hadn't used in days. I figured maybe I just forgot. I chalked it up to being tired, not paying attention, maybe even misremembering. It wasn't often. Once or twice a week, something would seem different than I remembered it. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but it kept happening. One morning I opened the fridge and saw a rice ball wrapper I didn't recognize. It was the convenience store kind, from Lawson. I hadn't bought it. I always get my lunch from the company cafeteria. I tossed it out, but it stuck in my mind. A few days later, I noticed the toilet seat was up. I always put it down after using it. Always. I grew up with sisters, so it's a habit. That time, I stared at it for a full minute, just standing in the bathroom, trying to figure it out. Still, I said nothing to anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy. I started locking my bedroom door at night, just to be safe. I know how that sounds, like a man afraid in his own home. But I couldn't help it. Something about the way things felt every time I came home, like the air was slightly warmer than it should be, or like the light was just a little off from how I'd left it. I wasn't sleeping well. I kept dreaming that I was being watched. Not harmed, just watched. Then one weekend, I stayed home the entire time. 2 full days and nothing happened. Nothing was out of place. Everything stayed exactly how I left it. That was the first time I really started to believe that maybe someone was getting in when I was gone. The locks weren't broken. The windows were secure. I started checking every possible entry point. Nothing showed signs of forced access. I even thought maybe someone had made a copy of my key, but I couldn't think of how. I don't lose things. I'd never had a break-in. That's when I decided to buy a small hidden camera. I ordered it online, one of those tiny ones with night vision and motion detection. It looked like a USB charger, but it had a lens built into the front. I plugged it in near the microwave, facing the kitchen and the hallway that led to the main room. I told myself I was just doing it to feel better, just to prove that nothing weird was happening, that I was being irrational. But deep down, I knew I was expecting to see something. I set the camera up on a Thursday evening before bed. I didn't check the footage until Saturday night. I don't know why I waited. Part of me was afraid of what I might find. But that night, after dinner, I sat down at my desk and connected the camera to my laptop. It had recorded 3 days worth of clips, triggered only by motion. Most of them were just me walking around in the morning or coming home from work. I fast-forwarded through them, and I saw something that made me stop. It was from Friday, around 2:18 a.m. The clip started with a long stretch of darkness. Then movement. From the top of the frame, a square outline appeared, a shadow in the ceiling. I stared, confused, until I realized what it was. The attic hatch. I never used it. It was one of those small square doors in the ceiling with a recessed handle you could pull down. I'd only looked up at it once when I first moved in. It led to a crawl space, maybe big enough to store a suitcase or two. I didn't even own a ladder tall enough to reach it, but in the footage I saw it open. Slowly, then a leg came down, a woman's leg, barefoot. She moved so carefully, like she'd done it 100 times. She climbed down, landing softly in the hallway. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and loose pants. Her hair was tied back. She walked straight to the kitchen, like she belonged there. She opened the fridge, took out a carton of juice, and drank straight from it. Then she opened the cabinet and pulled out a bag of chips. She walked into the main room, sat on the floor, and turned on the TV. The volume was low, but she settled in like it was her home. She watched for about 20 minutes. Then she got up, went back to the kitchen, cleaned up after herself. She even wiped down the counter and climbed back into the ceiling. I watched the clip 3 times. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. My mouth had gone dry. I was breathing like I just run somewhere. I had a stranger living in my ceiling. For a while, I just sat there. I didn't move. I couldn't even close the laptop. I kept looking at her face, trying to remember if I'd ever seen her before. I hadn't. Not in the building, not in the neighborhood. I didn't know who she was or how long she'd been there. I clicked through more clips. She came down again the next night, Friday, around the same time. Did the same things. Ate quietly. Watched a bit of TV, then disappeared into the ceiling again. It was like she'd made a routine of it. I didn't sleep that night. I turned every light on in the apartment and sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my hand, staring up at the ceiling hatch. Every sound made me jump. I kept imagining what would happen if she came down and saw me awake. At 2:14 a.m., I heard the faintest creak above me. I held my breath. Then nothing. Just silence. I stayed up until sunrise. When the light finally came through the balcony window, I started shaking. I couldn't stay there. I left and went to a nearby manga cafe and stayed there for the whole day. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? What would I even say? I decided to go to the building manager first. His office was on the first floor. I told him I thought someone had gotten into my apartment. He looked surprised. He said no one else had a key. I didn't tell him about the footage. I just asked if there was any way someone could access the attic space. He said the attic in each unit wasn't connected. It was sealed off per apartment, but the roof had a small access door for maintenance workers. He agreed to come up with me and check it out. When we got to my apartment, I unlocked the door and let him in. I pointed at the hatch. He looked up, then got a stepladder from the utility closet in the hallway. He pushed open the hatch and looked inside with a flashlight. Then he froze. He called out quietly, asking me to hand him his phone. I did. He whispered something into it, probably calling the police. Then he climbed up. I heard movement, a rustle, something shifting. He came down with his face pale and tight. "She's up there," he said. The police came about 20 minutes later. They didn't go in right away. 2 officers waited below while another one climbed up. I stayed outside, pacing on the walkway outside my door. They brought her down in handcuffs. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She looked small, calm, almost tired. Her clothes were dirty. Her eyes were sunken. She looked like someone who had lived in the dark for a long time. They found a sleeping bag, a few small bags of food, some water bottles, and a plastic box where she had stored wrappers and waste. She had been up there for at least 2 months, maybe longer. She hadn't brought much with her. No electronics, nothing personal except a photo of an old man in a hospital bed. That was the only clue. Later, I found out that she had once lived in the same building, years ago. Her father had passed away, and she had no job, no income. She'd been evicted. She came back one night, found the attic door unlocked on the roof, and started living there in secret. She moved from unit to unit whenever one was empty or being renovated. When I moved in, she must have decided to stay hidden. The cops said it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. In dense cities with tight housing and limited security, some people found ways to slip between the cracks. People desperate enough to live unnoticed. They charged her with trespassing, theft, and unlawful entry. She didn't deny anything. She just said she had nowhere else to go. I changed apartments after that. I didn't want to stay there another night. I kept the camera footage for a while, but eventually deleted it. I couldn't bring myself to watch it again. For weeks afterward, I kept looking up at ceilings, in stores, in stairwells, in friends' homes. I kept thinking about how easy it had been for her, how quiet she'd been, how she'd lived just feet above me, night after night. I don't live on the top floor anymore. And now, every time I move into a new place, the first thing I do is check the attic. Every corner, every vent, every inch of ceiling space. Because I know now, for sure, that sometimes we're not as alone as we think. I needed a break. Things have been heavy at work for months. Long hours, no sleep, and the kind of stress that creeps into your bones without you realizing it. So when I got a few days off, I decided to get out of the city. Just some time alone, a change of scenery. Nothing big, no travel plans or flights. Just a quiet place a couple hours out, somewhere I could sleep in, read, maybe go on walks. I didn't need a hotel or resort. I just wanted peace and quiet. I opened up Airbnb and searched for places within a few hours' drive. One caught my eye right away. Modern condo, all white interiors, sleek wood floors, clean design. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the rooms with natural light. The photos made it look calm, almost serene. A big bed with white sheets, spotless kitchen, even a balcony with a view of trees and sky. It looked brand new. The listing said recently renovated, quiet neighborhood, easy check-in. It had only a couple reviews, but they were both 5 stars. I didn't think much of it. I booked it for 3 nights. The drive up was uneventful. I left after lunch, took the highway most of the way, then turned off into smaller roads lined with trees and occasional houses. The sun was low when I arrived. I pulled up to a beige apartment complex. Not fancy, not bad, just normal. 4 floors, quiet street, small parking lot out front. The building wasn't exactly what I'd expected. It looked older than the place in the photos, but I figured maybe it had just been renovated inside. I got the key from a lockbox near the front door and took the elevator up. The hallway was dim, smelled faintly of dust and cleaning products. My unit was on the 3rd floor. I unlocked the door and stepped in. Right away, something fell off. It was darker than it should have been. I turned on a light and looked around. The condo was nothing like the photos. The walls were yellowed and dull. The furniture was all mismatched. An old plaid couch with sunken cushions, a wooden coffee table scratched and stained, a fake leather armchair with a rip down the side. Everything smelled faintly of smoke. Not fresh smoke, just that stale, embedded scent that never really leaves. I walked deeper in, hoping maybe I had the wrong place or the wrong key. But no, this was the unit number on the listing. The kitchen was worse. Dishes in the sink, some with crusted food still stuck on them. A frying pan on the stove with a greasy film still on the surface. One cabinet door hung crooked, barely attached. The fridge was humming loudly. I opened it. Inside were a couple open soda cans, a container of old rice, and something in a Tupperware I didn't want to smell. I walked to the windows, hoping at least the view would be like the listing. But the floor-to-ceiling windows? Boarded up. From the inside, someone had taken thick plywood panels and screwed them into the frames. No sunlight came through, just thin slivers of gray light around the edges. The boards looked like they'd been there for a while. I felt this tight, uneasy pressure in my chest. I'm not picky. I've stayed in older places before. But this wasn't just old or worn down, it felt wrong. The listing had been a lie. This wasn't a modern condo. This was someone's rundown sublet. Or worse, I turned to leave. I wasn't going to sleep here. I didn't even want to sit down. I reached for the door, grabbed the handle, and it didn't turn. It was one of those round knobs, and it just spun loosely. No resistance. I pulled harder. It didn't open. I twisted it again, tried pushing, pulling, nothing. I tried the deadbolt. It turned, but the door still wouldn't budge. It was jammed somehow, like it was locked from the outside. I stepped back and stared at it. Then I tried again, yanking harder, even kicking near the bottom. Still nothing. I checked for a second lock, a chain, nothing. Just a jammed handle. I tried calling the host through the Airbnb app. No response. I messaged again. Still nothing. I refreshed the page, checked the contact info. No phone number listed. Just a name and profile picture of someone smiling in front of a beach. I sat down on the edge of the bed, thin mattress, mismatched sheets, and tried Airbnb support. It took forever to get through. First, I had to go through the automated system. Then a support agent finally messaged back. They said they'd look into it and reach out to the host. No real help. I explained I couldn't get out of the unit, that the place wasn't what was shown, that it might not even be legal. I waited. Nothing. It started getting dark outside. I hadn't eaten. I didn't want to touch anything in the kitchen. I paced the small space. Every minute in there made me more restless. There were weird little details that started to bother me. An unplugged TV on a dresser with a thick layer of dust, a closet with a single coat inside, the bathroom light flickering when I turn it on, stains on the carpet near the couch. The place wasn't just old. It felt abandoned, like someone had moved out in a rush and left it half-used. I kept checking the door, turning the knob again and again. I considered calling 911, but I didn't know what I'd say. I wasn't in danger, technically, just locked in. It wasn't an emergency, not exactly. I went to the window in the bedroom and tried prying at the edge of the board. It had been screwed in tight, but the wood was old. I worked at it with a fork from the kitchen, wiggling it back and forth until one of the screws started to give. It took over an hour, slow and tiring work, but I finally loosened one side enough to slip my fingers in. I wedged it open little by little until I could push the board away. Behind it was a standard sliding window. I unlocked it and pushed up. It opened. Thank God. Outside was the small gap between buildings and a drop down to a patch of dead grass behind the lot. I was on the third floor. Not a small jump, but there was a metal staircase just a few feet over. One of those emergency fire escapes. If I could get across the ledge, I could reach it. I slid one leg out, then the other, heart racing the whole time. I wasn't athletic, but adrenaline made up for it. I edged along the wall, gripping the window frame until I could step onto the ledge. I took one breath, reached out, and grabbed the railing of the fire escape. It held. I pulled myself onto it and climbed down fast. I didn't look back. I walked straight out of the alley and onto the sidewalk. I called my friend who lived about 40 minutes away. He answered right away. I didn't explain much, just asked if he could come get me. He said yes, no questions asked. While I waited, I stood near the curb. Didn't sit, didn't lean, just stood. A few cars passed, lights on in some windows across the street. The world felt normal again, but I couldn't shake how strange it had been up there. I got picked up about 45 minutes later. I didn't talk much in the car, just told my friend I'd explain later. Back at his place, I finally got through to someone higher up at Airbnb. They took it more seriously than the first rep. I sent photos of the boarded up windows, the dirty kitchen, the jammed door. I sent a screenshot of the listing. They said the listing had been reported already by someone else just a week before. Apparently, the photos had been stolen from another property, an actual modern condo in a different state. The one I'd been in wasn't a real Airbnb. Not officially. Someone had sublet it and used fake info to make the listing. The host profile was suspended. Airbnb refunded me fully and added credit to my account. They apologized, said they'd investigate further. But that didn't undo the night I spent locked inside a stranger's apartment. Even now, I think about that door. How it opened fine from the outside. Obviously, or I wouldn't have gotten in, but didn't from the inside. I think about the boards on the windows, the smell of smoke, the old coat in the closet. Someone had lived there. Not just they lived, And whoever had set up the listing hadn't cared what shape the place was in. They just needed a way to make money off it. Maybe they didn't even expect anyone to stay. Maybe they didn't check often. I don't know. I still use Airbnb sometimes, but I triple check everything now. Reverse image search on the photos. Look up the address, even if it's hidden. Read every review, even the ones that seem minor. And I never, ever stay in a place with boarded up windows. That weekend was supposed to be peaceful. A break from work, a reset. Instead, it was claustrophobic, eerie, and unsettling in a way I still can't quite explain. There was no ghost, no threat, just a door that wouldn't open, a window that had been covered up, and a fake version of reality behind one click and a smiling profile picture. It reminded me that not everything that looks clean and bright online is real. Sometimes what's behind a photo is just an empty shell, used, forgotten, and locked from the inside. It was the third week of our backpacking trip around Greece. We were sunburnt, hungover, and running low on money, but spirits were high. We'd been sleeping rough, mostly in fields, beaches, and the occasional overpriced hostel. But that day we stumbled on what looked like a hidden gem. A proper campsite tucked away in the hills, surrounded by olive trees and dry grass. About 10 minutes walk from a small village that sold cheap beer and bread. It had showers, a communal sink, even a little corner for fires. The place was totally empty, which was weird considering it was mid-June and the weather was perfect. The owner, an older woman with skin like baked leather and not a single tooth in her mouth, came hobbling out of a little hut near the entrance. She waved us in like we were long-lost family. She was clearly either a little mad or just wildly friendly, but she didn't ask any questions, just grinned wide and handed us a key for the toilet block. We set up our tents on the flattest patch of grass near the edge of the trees, where we had a bit of shade. I remember thinking it was quiet, too quiet. Even for a remote site like that, you'd expect at least 1 or 2 vans or motorbikes. But it was just us, the weird lady, and her pack of scraggly, fly-bitten dogs. After we set up, we went for a walk around grounds. The land was big, bigger than it looked at first. We passed a few empty tent plots and some overgrown garden beds. Then we saw it, a massive canvas caravan tent tucked away behind a thick row of bushes. The fabric was sun-bleached, greenish-gray, and drooped a little at the middle. There were chairs set up outside, a folding table with plates still on it, dried food on one of them, another plate stacked with old bread that had gone hard and gray. There were 3 mugs, still half full, one with dead flies floating in it. A gas burner was rusting on the ground beside the table. What got me the most was the wheelchair. It was sitting just behind the tent, half covered in a sheet. Dusty, but not completely. It looked like someone had used it recently. It wasn't rusted or sun-damaged. It just looked left. We walked around the back and saw rolls of sticky flypaper, each one black with insects. Hundreds of them, stuck and twitching. The whole place smelled like a mix of sour milk and rotting fruit. It didn't feel right. You know how some places just feel wrong? This was one of them. Everything was quiet, no birds, no wind. Even the flies were slow, like they were drunk. We didn't stay long. Took a few quick pictures, said something like this is some Texas chainsaw stuff, and moved on. About 20 meters past that, we found what was left of another tent. It looked like someone had slashed it to pieces with a machete or some wild animal had gone through it. The poles were snapped, the fabric shredded and flapping in the dry wind. There were clothes strewn across the ground, shorts, a hoodie, socks, and some cans of food, most of them dented, one completely torn open like it had been bitten into. A sleeping bag was lying there too, covered in dust and pine needles. It had a big tear across the middle, and something dark stained around the rib. We didn't look too close. I think we all felt it at the same time. We shouldn't be standing there. Still, we were idiots, so we took more pictures and laughed it off. Called it Camp Death, like it was a joke. Said we'd survive the night if we stuck to ouzo and baked beans. That night, we walked into the village shop and stocked up on beer, cheap spirits, and canned food. I remember the shopkeeper gave us a weird look when we said we were staying up at the site, but he didn't say anything. Just rang us up and went back to whatever he was doing before. Maybe he knew better than to talk. Back at the campsite, The weird lady was feeding a massive pot of slop to her dogs. She waved at us again, smiling like she'd won the lottery. We started cooking over the fire pit, a tin of beans in one pot, some bread on sticks over the flames. It was one of those evenings that starts off great. Warm air, stars starting to show, the kind of calm that makes you feel safe. Then this guy showed up. He didn't say a word, just appeared out of the trees at the edge of the camp, walking slow like he had all the time in the world. He was tall, probably in his late 40s, with dark jeans, black boots, and a full set of black biker leathers. Even had the gloves on. He looked like he'd walked off a movie set. Didn't look at us, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge anything. He walked straight over to the ripped up tent we'd found earlier and, without a word, started dragging it away. I swear to God, he didn't say a thing. Just grabbed the edge of the ruined tent and started hauling it off into the trees like it was normal. Like it was trash day. We didn't know what to do. Just sat there, frozen, pretending we hadn't seen anything. He didn't come back. We didn't hear an engine or see lights. He just vanished into the woods with it. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made my heart jump. One of the dogs barked around 3 a.m. and wouldn't stop for almost half an hour. I kept thinking about the wheelchair, the food on the table, the torn sleeping bag, and now someone just dragging all of it away like cleanup crew. Who was he cleaning up for? But nothing else happened that night. The morning was calm. Too calm again. No birds, no wind. Just dry leaves and quiet. We debated leaving, but we were stubborn and didn't want to look scared. We spent the second day mostly drinking and playing cards. Got pretty wasted that night, actually. Even ended up sharing drinks with the old lady and feeding scraps to her dogs. She laughed the whole time, even danced at one point with a bottle of ouzo in her hand like she was celebrating something. We didn't ask what. By the third morning, I wanted to go. Something had been sitting wrong with me since we got there, and the hangover didn't help. We packed up quietly. I noticed that the caravan tent, the one with the plates and the wheelchair, was gone. Completely gone. No marks on the ground, no trash, no chairs. Just dry earth and grass, like it had never been there. We didn't talk about it, just nodded to the old lady and left. Looking back, I still don't know what we saw. Maybe someone had been squatting there and cleared out fast. Maybe there was a caretaker who didn't like strangers snooping around. Maybe we were just overthinking it all. But the way that guy in biker leathers moved, so slow, so calm, it still creeps me out. Like he was used to cleaning up things people shouldn't see. Like he knew we'd find it eventually, and he didn't care. We kept joking about camp death for the rest of the trip, but I think all of us felt something real back there. Something we weren't supposed to be near. There was no story in the papers. No missing persons posters. No one asked us questions. But I still have those photos buried somewhere in my old hard drive. The plates, the flies, the ripped sleeping bag. I don't think I'll ever camp in Greece again. I had planned this camping trip months in advance. I needed the break, and I needed it away from people, away from everything. I picked a small, rarely visited stretch of woods in the northern part of the state, somewhere near the border, a spot I had found years ago while driving aimlessly after a bad breakup. Back then, I didn't stop, but I remembered how empty it felt. No cars, no houses, no signs of people for miles. It felt right this time. I packed light. Sleeping bag, tent, canned food, water jugs, lighter, knife, flashlight, a few batteries, and my old campus backpack. I left my phone behind on purpose. I didn't want updates or emails or group chats pulling me back in. I reached the trailhead around late afternoon. It wasn't marked officially, but there was a narrow cut through the trees, a path flattened from occasional foot traffic or deer. The sun was still above the trees, but I knew I had only a couple hours before it dipped below and the forest went dim. I walked for about an hour and a half, just far enough until the sound of the road was completely gone and the path was more leaves than dirt. That's when I found a clearing, a small open spot surrounded by tall birch trees and deadfall. A perfect place to camp. I dropped my bag and cleared the ground, pushed aside twigs and rocks, and pitched the tent while the light held. The air was cool and dry. No birds sang, which I noticed in a quiet, small way. I didn't think much of it then, but it stuck with me. I started a small fire using dry pine needles and bark. I ate a can of chili straight from the tin and listened to the fire crackle. That night, the woods were quiet. I mean dead quiet. No crickets, no rustling, not even the wind. I told myself it was probably the altitude or the cold, or maybe just that I was far enough from people that nature hadn't adapted to the usual human noise. I laid in my sleeping bag with the tent flap open, just watching the trees sway slightly in the breeze. I didn't feel scared, just alone. And that was the point. Sometime in the early hours, just before dawn, I heard something moving outside. It was soft, but it was steady. Something stepping slowly over dry leaves and brittle sticks. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a raccoon. It was deliberate. The steps were spaced out, almost like it was trying to be quiet. I laid there, barely breathing, one hand on the knife near my sleeping bag. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. The steps came closer, then stopped. I waited, counting in my head, heart pounding so loud I thought whatever was out there could hear it. After what felt like forever, I heard nothing else. No steps, no breathing, nothing. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, and with the blue dawn came a bit of courage. I unzipped the flaps slowly and looked around. There was no one, no tracks, just quiet woods and the same scattered leaves from the day before. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was a deer or something. Still, I kept the knife in my pocket that whole day. I didn't hike that morning. I stayed in camp, gathering dry wood, organizing gear, walking a small perimeter around the clearing. But I didn't go far. I noticed something strange behind a thick patch of brush, maybe 50 yards from the tent. Some trees had their bark scraped off at eye level in a single long strip down to the wood. Not claw marks, not random damage, just a single clean strip, maybe 2 inches wide and a foot long. 3 trees in a line, same damage. I touched one. The wood was dry, but something about it felt too clean, too straight. I've seen deer rub antlers on trees before, but this wasn't that. It looked more like someone used a tool. I didn't like it. I went back to camp and tried to ignore it. That night, I built the fire bigger. I set up some empty cans on string around the clearing, just in case. It made me feel better, like I was doing something. When night fell again, the quiet returned, heavier than the night before. No sound at all. It was unnatural. The fire crackled loud in the silence. I sat on a log with my back to a tree and watched the darkness outside the firelight. Around midnight, I heard a sound again. Not footsteps this time. Something sharp like a twig snapping. Then another. Then silence. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the sound. Nothing. Just trees. I turned it off and waited. Then the cans rattled. A quick clink, then silence again. My hands went cold. I stood up slowly, holding the knife, heart pounding. I didn't move toward the sound. I didn't want to. I just stood there until the fire died low and finally crawled into the tent without sleeping. At first light, I packed up. I wasn't going to stay another night. I didn't care how peaceful I thought it'd be. Something fell off, and I was done pretending it didn't. As I rolled up the sleeping bag, I noticed the string with the cans had been cut, clean, right at the knot. Not torn, not chewed, sliced. I checked all around the perimeter of the clearing. No footprints, no drag marks, just a single cut in the line. I didn't eat breakfast. I shoved everything into the bag and started back the way I came. But as I hiked back, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The path looked similar, but the sun was in the wrong place, and the turns didn't match what I remembered. I kept walking faster, turning around a few times, second-guessing myself. I hadn't marked the trail because I thought I knew where I was going. I'd followed the trees, the slope, the ridgeline, but now it all looked the same. I walked for hours. The light started to fade again. I wasn't back at the road. No tire tracks, no gravel, just more trees. I sat down on a rock and tried to breathe, tried to think. I had a compass in the bag. It pointed east, the direction I thought the road was. I started walking that way, sticking close to landmarks, a boulder, a split tree, anything I could use in case I had to backtrack. I walked for another hour before I saw it. A dead fire. Old, blackened stones. Bits of burned paper stuck to a charred log. Someone had camped there, but it wasn't my site. I didn't recognize any of it. The rocks were wrong, the trees spaced differently. But that wasn't the worst part. Next to the fire was a pair of boots. Old, dried out, worn through at the soles. Inside one of them was a sock, still in it. The other one had dirt and leaves packed inside, like it had sat there a long time. I looked around and saw a rusted can opener nailed into a tree. Not hanging, nailed. Above it, carved into the bark, were initials, 3 of them. Faded, deep. Something about it felt wrong. I didn't want to stand there any longer. I kept going east. I walked until my legs were shaking, until I couldn't take another step. I set up camp in the most open area I could find. I didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I just laid there in my bag, knife in my hand, listening. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the sound of breathing just outside the tent. In the morning, I was woken by a crow, the first bird I'd heard in days. I opened the flap and saw it in a tree nearby, picking at something shiny. A plastic wrapper, one of mine. I didn't remember dropping it. I got up and looked around. More trash, a crumpled can, an empty bag of jerky, stuff from my pack, but I hadn't taken any of it out. It was laid out in a line, stretching into the woods like breadcrumbs. I didn't follow it. I left everything except my knife, compass, and a water bottle. I walked straight east again, through brush, over a creek, through a field of broken stumps that looked like they'd been chainsawed years ago and left to rot. Eventually, I hit a dirt road, a real one, tire tracks. I followed it for nearly 3 hours before I saw a car parked on the side and a man checking something in his trunk. I didn't say anything. I just walked past him like I was out for a long hike and followed the road until it met pavement. From there, I hitched a ride back to town. I never reported anything. There was nothing to report, not really. Just a string cut clean, some bark stripped off trees, a campfire that didn't belong to me, and my own trash laid out like a trail. I've been camping since, but never alone, never without GPS, never in that part of the state again. I still don't know what I walked into out there, but I know something watched me, something that wanted me to feel it, not see it, something that knew I was alone. And I think if I had stayed one more night, I might never have come back. It was one of those school trips they planned to make everyone bond or learn survival skills or something. A weekend out in the woods with the whole class, mostly canoeing during the day and sitting around the fire at night, pretending to enjoy dehydrated food and bad jokes. I remember the long bus ride to the campsite more than anything else. The uncomfortable quiet between kids who only talked in class but never outside of it. The sound of gum popping and the teacher constantly reminding us that phones weren't allowed. It was supposed to be a disconnect and experience nature weekend. Most of us were around 13, a few 14. Just old enough to want to act like adults, but not old enough to do anything smart with that attitude. The place was remote. I don't remember the name of the lake, only that we had to hike about half a mile from the drop-off point to reach the campsite. It was a narrow clearing surrounded by dense trees that blocked most of the sky. We pitched our tents in groups of 3 or 4. I share mine with 2 other girls, Maya and Hannah. We all did the usual routine. Set up the tent, change into dry clothes after the canoes, roast marshmallows, try to scare each other with dumb stories someone's older brother had told them. It was the kind of night that felt full of static in your chest from laughing too hard at nothing. I went to sleep feeling sore, but calm. Then I woke up. It was late, real late. The kind of late where the air feels still and the temperature drops just enough to make your nose cold. I woke up without knowing why. I didn't need to pee. No sound had jerked me out of sleep, but my eyes just opened on their own. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Fast ones. Not animal fast. Not the kind of galloping you'd hear from a deer or the soft scamper of a raccoon. These were 2-footed, light but frantic, pacing, circling the tents, not directly bumping into anything, just moving. Sometimes close to our tent, then farther off toward the trees, then back near the campfire. And the breathing. That's what really stuck in my mind. It wasn't regular breathing, not deep. It was like when you've cried so hard you're trying to stop, but your chest still hiccups with each inhale. You know that sound when someone's trying to calm down, but can't? Like short, shallow wheezing mixed with that shaky edge of trying not to totally lose it? That's what I heard, over and over again. That kind of desperate breathing. Whoever it was didn't say anything, didn't sob out loud, but they were right on the edge of it, like a dam holding back too much water. I lay there on my back with my sleeping bag pulled up to my chin. The sound of it running never really stopped. It just kept going. Sometimes it would speed up, like it was darting across the whole camp in a few seconds. Then slow, pacing near one of the tents. But always that same erratic breath, like someone trapped in a state of pure panic, but trying not to let it show. And the weird thing was, it sounded small. Not little kid small, but definitely not someone our age. Quick and light, like a child who hadn't grown much muscle yet. But again, none of us were that small. 13, maybe 12 if someone skipped a grade, but even then, it wasn't toddler fast. It fell off. The footsteps didn't have the weight or rhythm of any of us. Then all at once it ran off. I could hear its feet on the pine needles and dirt, getting lighter and lighter with each step until the sound just faded into the trees. It didn't crash through the underbrush, didn't snap twigs or shake bushes, just vanished with careful steps like it knew exactly where it was going. I was frozen for a while, just lying there staring at the tent ceiling. I didn't hear anything else, not even an owl or wind through the trees. Eventually, I turned onto my side, just slowly enough that the nylon of the sleeping bag didn't make too much noise. And that's when I saw Hannah. Her eyes were open wide, staring straight at me. Not scared exactly, but blank, just staring like she was registering me and not much else. We didn't say anything, not right away. I gave a small nod and whispered, "You got woken up too?" She didn't say anything, just gave one slow nod and then turned over with her back to me. The next morning, everyone acted normal. I brought it up casually when we were eating those awful oatmeal packets, but nobody said they heard anything. I asked Hannah again later when we were packing up, and she said she didn't remember waking up at all. She looked confused, like she was trying to remember a dream that slipped away the second she opened her eyes. When I asked the teacher, just to see if maybe she heard it, she smiled and gave me this look, half annoyed, half pitying, and said something like, "You have an active imagination, huh? Maybe ease off the campfire stories." That was enough to shut me up. I don't know what it was. Some part of me thought maybe it was a younger sibling of someone who came along last minute. But we did a head count every night. We all had assigned tents. The teachers had a list. No one was missing, and nothing was stolen or touched or even moved. Just something ran circles around us in the dark, scared out of its mind. And then it left. I still think about that sometimes, especially when I'm alone at night and hear soft footsteps outside. Anyway, I've got one more thing that happened. I think this one might have a real explanation, but it stuck with me too. Years later, I went camping with my aunt and her family near a lake. They had this old 70s camper, orange and brown stripes down the sides, the kind with fake wood paneling inside. It rained all afternoon. Hard rain, the kind that makes everything damp no matter how careful you are. And the wind was rough. The trees around us shook so much it looked like they'd rip right out of the ground. The camper rocked back and forth, and the walls creaked like a boat. We all laughed nervously like we weren't afraid, but you could feel it. That weird tension when everyone is pretending not to be on edge. By the time we went to bed, it had calmed down a little. The wind died down, but you could still hear the trees dripping and branches creaking. I fell asleep next to the little window, facing the lake through the gap in the trees. I woke up in the middle of the night. There wasn't a sound. Not rain, not wind. It was totally still. The moon was out, huge and bright. Not just bright in that poetic sense, but actually bright enough to light up the camper like a nightlight. It was shining through the small window right onto my face. I sat up and looked out, mostly just admiring how everything was lit up like a silver dream. The lake looked like glass, perfectly calm, and right in the center of the lake, near the middle where the moonlight hit, something moved. At first, I thought it was a moth or a bat, something flying over the water. But it wasn't that fast or that erratic. It moved in a looping pattern, circling the same area like it was dancing or trying to trace something in the air. It would dip down close to the water, almost touching the surface, then pull up again in a gentle swoop, like a skipping stone that never landed. I stared at it for maybe a full minute before I realized how strange it was. It was the wrong size for a bug. If I judged by how far out on the lake it would have been about the size of a cat, maybe a bit bigger. It wasn't fuzzy or anything I could clearly see the shape of. It was just dark against the light of the moon and the reflection on the water. And I saw its reflection, that's the thing. I know it was real because the water caught its shape perfectly each time it came close. It kept circling and looping like it had a pattern, but not a regular one. It never touched the water, but it stayed just above it, teasing it like it was playing some kind of game I didn't understand. Eventually, its loops started getting wider. It circled farther out, then dipped behind a line of trees on the far shore. I waited, staring at that spot for a long time, expecting it to come back out. It never did. I didn't wake anyone up. I didn't say anything in the morning. It was one of those things you don't mention because you're not even sure what to say. I saw something weird, but not dangerous. Doesn't really start conversation. Maybe it was a bird or a drone or something else I can't explain with the limited things I knew at the time. But that image, whatever it was, dancing just above the water in total silence under the moonlight, still sits in my head. I've looked for videos or explanations. Never found anything that moves quite like it. I'm open to ideas. I want there to be a normal reason. I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. But both times, I didn't feel like I was supposed to see what I did. Whatever it was. It happened a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4, I can't recall exactly. It was during one of our usual group trips, a tradition we had picked up since college. There were 7 of us who regularly stayed in touch, and once or twice a year, we would plan a short trip somewhere, sometimes to the beach, sometimes into the hills. But our favorite was always the farmhouse that belonged to one of our friend's uncles. It wasn't a fancy place. In fact, it was a bit old, no Wi-Fi, no TV, barely any phone signal. But that was exactly what made it special. It was inside a forest, not deep enough to be scary, but far enough from the main road that you couldn't hear traffic or any other human activity. Just birds during the day, crickets at night, and the occasional bark of a distant dog. The peace, there was something else. Clean air, a cool breeze in the evening, the smell of trees and soil all around. It felt like stepping away from the world. We arrived late in the afternoon. The drive was long, about 5 hours, and the last stretch was a rough dirt road. By the time we reached the farmhouse, the sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows from the trees. As usual, we unpacked, claimed our mattresses, and then gathered outside for a small campfire. Someone brought Bluetooth speakers, someone else brought whiskey, and we just settled into the familiar rhythm of stories, laughs, and drinks under the open sky. It was perfect. The stars were visible, scattered across the black sky like white grains of sand. The fire crackled, throwing warm light across our tired faces. And for a while, everything just felt right. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it must have been past 1 a.m. The fire was still going, and the bottle was almost empty. Most of the group was still outside, just swaying slightly, lost in their own thoughts or mid-conversation. That's when 3 of us, me, Kanal, and Aman, decided to go down to the river. It was a stupid idea in hindsight, but it didn't feel like that at the time. We were high, just the right mix of drunk and careless. The river wasn't too far, maybe a 10-minute walk. But to get there, you had to pass through the forest. Not a paved path or even a dirt trail, just a kind of natural way you could follow if you knew where to look. You had to step over roots, push aside low branches, and walk carefully because of the uneven ground. We had gone down to the river before during the day, so we felt confident. But this was different. The forest at night felt more alive in a strange way. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes sounded louder than it should. But we didn't care. We laughed, we shouted, we pushed each other around like kids. I remember Amon climbing onto a boulder and screaming something random into the trees. We made our way down to the riverbank, skipping rocks, throwing sticks, making a mess. The river was calm, just a slow flow of black water reflecting the moonlight. There was something hauntingly beautiful about it. We stayed down there for a while. We lost track of time. No phones, no watches, just the sound of the river, our voices echoing through the trees, and the cool air brushing against our faces. After maybe 20 or 30 minutes, we started walking back. At first, everything felt fine. The path was the same, the trees familiar. But halfway through, I felt it, this strange sensation like someone was behind us. Not close, but not far either. I didn't say anything because I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was the drinks, maybe it was the silence of the forest after all that shouting, but it felt like something had shifted, like we weren't alone. I looked over at Amon, and he seemed uneasy too. His smile had faded, and he was walking faster. Kanal was ahead, too lost in his own world to notice anything. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a wild dog, or even just a bird fluttering in the bushes. But whatever it was, it kept pace with us. No sound, no light, just that pressure, the kind that presses on your back when someone stares too long. We didn't talk about it, not one word. We just kept walking faster and faster until the farmhouse lights peeked through the trees. We were almost there, maybe 20 feet from the clearing when it happened. A loud, sharp voice cut through the silence. It wasn't close, but it was clear. Look at the time. Is this the time to be roaming around? Go and sleep. Just like that. Sharp, angry, like someone scolding kids for staying out too long. We froze. I swear I felt my heart stop for a second. The voice didn't echo like ours had down by the river. It was grounded, real solid, and it came from the path behind us. We turned around instantly, expecting to see someone walking toward us. And we did see something, but not someone. Just a dark figure standing between the trees. No features, no clothes, no light reflecting off it. Just a black silhouette, still as a rock, not moving at all. It stood there for maybe 3 seconds, and then it was gone. Not walked away, just no longer there. We didn't wait around. None of us said anything. We just ran the last few steps up to the farmhouse, hearts pounding, too scared to look back. When we reached the fire, we were expecting to see the rest of our group laughing or talking. But they were quiet, just staring at us like we were late to something. One of them checked his watch and said it had been over an hour since we left. They had been waiting for us to return because no one wanted to go to sleep until everyone was back. We asked if anyone came down after us. They said no. No one left the fire, and the uncle who owned the farmhouse had been asleep inside since before midnight. One of us went inside just to check. He was still there, snoring lightly, wrapped in a blanket. He hadn't moved at all. That's when it hit us. We all looked at each other, suddenly wide awake, sobered up in an instant. We weren't imagining the voice. We all heard it. We weren't imagining the figure either. We saw something, and whoever it wasn't any of our friends. It wasn't the uncle. It wasn't someone from our group. And the way it stood there, completely still, completely silent, there was nothing normal about it. But it wasn't supernatural either. That's what made it worse. It was someone real, someone in that forest at that hour, watching us, maybe following us, maybe waiting. That whole night, none of us slept. We tried, but every small sound outside the windows made us flinch. We sat together in the living room, all the lights on, just staring at the door. We didn't talk about it much. No one wanted to be the first to admit how scared they were. But you could feel it, this heaviness in the air, like something had brushed against our lives and left a mark. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, we packed. No one said it out loud, but we all knew we wanted to leave. The forest felt different now. The peace was gone, replaced with this unease that sat in your chest and didn't go away. On the drive back, we kept glancing at the trees lining the road, half expecting to see that shadow again. To this day, we don't know who or what it was. Maybe a local hiding in the woods, maybe a poacher, maybe just someone passing through who didn't like us being loud that late. But the way that voice came out of the dark, the way that figure stood so still, it felt like more than just coincidence. It felt like warning, like we crossed into someone else's space and they wanted us to know it. Since then, we've never gone back to that farmhouse. We still take trips, still meet up, but never again to that place. And none of us ever talk about what happened that night, not really. But every once in a while, when we sit around a new campfire somewhere else, one of us will go quiet for a few seconds and we'll know exactly what they're thinking about. I've been camping all my life. My parents started taking me out to the woods when I was barely old enough to walk, and ever since then it's been something I do on my own, solo, or with a few friends. I've learned how to set up camp fast, how to smell a storm coming before the clouds build up, how to tell the difference between raccoon prints and dog prints, and 100 other small things that only really come from experience. I've also learned that as peaceful and beautiful as nature is, the real problem when you're camping is almost always people. Not animals, not the dark, not being alone. People. It sounds paranoid when you say it out loud, but I've had too many run-ins to believe otherwise. Theft is the big one. Coolers, lanterns, stoves, even tents. People will grab whatever they can in the middle of the night and disappear. You wake up and something's gone. At first you think maybe you misplaced it, maybe a bear dragged it off, but then you start finding footprints that don't belong to you. Boot prints around your site that stop just at the edge of your light. That's when it sinks in. That's why I started using trail cams. At first it was just one pointed at the fire pit, but now every time I go out I set up at least 4. One pointing at the tent, one angled at the table, one covering the general perimeter, and one hidden low near the coolers or gear bags. They're camouflaged and night activated. Full audio. You wouldn't even notice them unless you knew exactly what to look for. Last fall, I decided to take a 3-night trip alone out to a campsite I had been to before in Northern California. It's a long ways down a dirt road that people usually avoid unless they're trying to go deep in. No hookups, no bathrooms, just cleared out spaces, trees, and a lake maybe a 10-minute walk away. I like it that way. No screaming kids, no drunk college groups. First night was peaceful. I got in around 2 p.m., picked a site that had a good amount of cover and still some visibility. I set up the tent, unfolded my cot and sleeping bag inside, arranged my kitchen bin and food storage about 20 feet from the tent, and hung a bare bag rope in the trees. Then I walked around with my cams, setting each one carefully. I'd gotten good at hiding them. One went into a tree hollow, one under the picnic table nailed to the underside, one tucked under some pine needles next to a rock near the back end of my site, and the last in a broken stump that faced my fire pit and cooking gear. That first night, I lit a fire, ate dehydrated chili and cornbread, sipped a beer, and listened to the forest settle. I crawled into my tent around 10:30 and slept fine. Just the usual forest sounds. Wind moving through trees, the distant croak of frogs, occasional rustling that was probably raccoons. The second day, I hiked. I brought my pack, a meal bar, water, and GPS, and I left the site for most of the day. Maybe 7 hours I was gone, maybe 8. I got back to camp around 5, and everything looked untouched. Firewood still stacked, gear still arranged. But when you've done this as long as I have, you start to notice little things. A rock moved, a footprint too big to be your own. Nothing major, but enough to make you pause. I decided not to say anything to myself out loud. I don't talk when I camp alone, not even out of habit, and just move through my usual evening routine. Fire, food, pack away the smellables, tuck into the tent. But that night, around 2:15 a.m., I heard a sound, a crunch of pine needles. One soft, deliberate footstep. I didn't sit up. I didn't breathe loud. I just opened my eyes and stared at the roof of the tent, ears straining. Another step, then nothing. The footsteps had come from the left side of my tent, the one facing the woods. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, but was probably 15 minutes, I fell asleep again. But when I woke up the next morning, I didn't go make coffee. I didn't build a fire. I didn't even get out of the tent at first. I reached for my trail, cam memory cards. I kept a reader in my backpack that worked with my phone. I opened the phone, slid into micro SD, and started reviewing. The first cam to check was the one by the fire pit. Around 2:13 a.m., the motion sensor activated. A figure walked in from the trees. Dark clothes, couldn't see the face. They didn't have a flashlight. They moved slow. They went straight for the table. I switched to the cam on the underside of the table. Their face came into view for a few seconds. Male, maybe 30s. No musk, just eyes darting around like he expected to be caught. He opened my kitchen bin, rifled through it, then froze like he heard something. He didn't take anything, just looked around a little more, then turned and walked toward the edge of the woods again. I checked the cam near the cooler. At 2:17 a.m., he passed directly in front of it. Didn't even notice it. He paused near my tent. He stood there for a while, at least 3 minutes. just standing there, looking at it. Then he turned and walked off. I didn't pack up right away. I waited. I spent the rest of the morning on edge, heart hammering every time I heard a branch snap. When noon came, I started packing up. Quietly, carefully. I didn't even eat breakfast. I loaded my gear into the car and made sure I didn't leave a trace. No garbage, no signs I'd been there. Then I drove down that dirt road and didn't stop until I hit pavement. When I got home, I watched the rest of the footage on my laptop. The same guy had come into my sight during the day too, around 1 p.m., about 5 hours after I'd left for my hike. He walked straight into the middle of the camp, looked around, crouched near the cooler, tried the lid, then walked around the back of my tent. He didn't touch anything else, but he was there for at least 5 minutes, just poking around. I exported the clearest video clips, especially the close-up from under the table, and took them to the ranger station at the entrance to that forest area. The ranger didn't seem surprised. He said they had reports. Other campers saying things went missing. Someone had their keys stolen. Someone else had all their water jugs emptied out and left upside down. They didn't have enough staff to patrol that far in, especially late in the season. I gave them the files. They said they'd file a report and keep a lookout, which I didn't really believe, but I felt like I had to do something. I haven't been back to that site since. Now, every time I camp, even when I go somewhere that feels safe, I don't just set up cameras. I put a small motion detector by the door of my tent that vibrates an alert into my sleeping pad. I lock up everything valuable in the car. I don't hike too far from camp unless someone else is there to keep an eye on it. I've learned the truth the hard way. Most of those stories you hear about people sneaking into campsites in the night, they're not just stories. They're not just made up ghost tales. It's real people, thieves, drunks, or just guys who like to walk around in the dark and stare into tents. And that's the worst part. You never know which kind you're getting until it's too late. I wasn't camping, not exactly, but it felt pretty close to it. I live in a rural area, out past the last streetlight, where the gravel roads stretch on forever and fields take up more space than houses. The nearest gas station is 15 minutes away. The neighbors are few and far between, and most of the time, it's just quiet. Not peaceful quiet like you hear in stories, but more of a heavy, watchful kind of quiet. The kind that makes you feel like if something went wrong, no one would hear you yelling. That summer, a few years back, we'd had one of the hottest Julys I could remember. The grass had dried to straw, and the air never really cooled off, even when the sun went down. Everything felt baked. The ground crunched underfoot. The flies were worse than usual, and the air smelled like dust and dry weeds. I let a brush pile in the back acreage build up more than I should have. Broken branches, a few rotted fence posts, piles of dead honeysuckle vines. I decided to burn it before it got too big to handle. Because of the heat, I waited until after dark. Still warm, but not deadly. There was no wind, which was good. I walked the short path from the house to the pile, with a flashlight in one hand and a water jug in the other, just in case the fire jumped. I wore boots, old jeans, and a long-sleeve shirt, more for bugs than for heat protection. The cornfield stretched along one side of the yard. That time of year, the stalks were tall and dry, taller than me, and packed tight together. You couldn't see a foot into it, even with a flashlight. I didn't like standing too close to it. Never had. There's something about a wall of corn at night that messes with your head. I lit the brush pile with some old newspaper and a few splashes of gas I'd poured earlier. The fire caught quick and flared high, snapping and cracking in the dry air. The smell of smoke and old wood and dead plants filled my nose. The fire gave off a thick, orange light that danced across the field edge. Behind me was only blackness. No moon, just a few stars. It was dead, quiet except for the fire and some faint cricket sounds off in the distance. I stepped back from the heat and stood maybe 20 feet away, keeping the flashlight off to let my eyes adjust. I always liked watching fire. It's hard not to. The way it moves is strange, hypnotic. The longer I stood there, the more the world seemed to shrink down to just the fire and the ring of darkness around it. That's when I heard the first sound, a low shuffling. At first I thought it was just the fire messing with my ears, or maybe a raccoon or possum creeping around. but it kept going, and it was coming from the corn. I froze. The noise was slow but steady, not rustling like the wind, not jerky like a bird. It was pushing through the stalks in a straight line, one after another, with a kind of weight behind it. The kind of sound something big makes. I stood still, heart picking up a little. I held the flashlight in my hand, but didn't turn it on yet. I was trying to listen. It kept coming, crunch, swish, crunch, swish. The distance between each sound didn't change much, and it moved with a weird calmness, like it wasn't in any kind of hurry. Whatever it wasn't small, and it wasn't nervous. It didn't sound like a person, but it also didn't sound like a deer. I've heard deer move through brush before. They're faster, clumsier. This was slower, heavier, and it wasn't running, which somehow made it feel worse. My mind started tossing up options. Could have been an injured animal, maybe a deer with a broken leg, or a cow that wandered off from someone's land. Maybe a bear, but we don't get many of those out here. Or a person, but who would be walking through a cornfield alone at night in July? The noise kept getting closer, maybe 20 feet away, 15. I took a few steps back, keeping the fire between me and the sound, and I finally flicked the flashlight on and pointed it at the field's edge. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then the stalks pushed outward and something stepped out. It was a dog, a massive brindle mastiff, coat streaked in dark and light brown like tree bark. He stood there, just outside the reach of the fire, his body casting a long, strange shadow across the ground. His head was low, ears slightly back, and his sides rose and felt like he'd been walking a long time. His ribs showed through his short fur. He didn't growl or bark. He just looked at me, not like a stray, more like he was checking me over, sizing me up. I didn't move. He stepped forward slowly and sat down near the edge of the firelight. I could see his eyes better then, dark and steady. There was something strange about how calm he was. Not afraid, not aggressive, just tired. Like he'd come a long way, and this was the first time he'd stopped in a while. We sat there like that for a good minute. Just me standing, holding the flashlight, and him sitting in the dry grass with the fire crackling between us. I thought about going to get him some water. I actually turned to take a step toward the house. But when I turned back, he was already getting up. He walked right past me, not close enough to touch, but not avoiding me either. His head turned slightly, and I swear he gave a small nod, like he was acknowledging me, like I'd helped in some way. Maybe the smoke from the fire had drawn him in from wherever he was lost. Maybe he just needed something solid to walk toward, a light in the middle of nothing. He walked down the dirt path, heading toward the road. I followed a few steps behind, but didn't try to call him or stop him. He never looked back. He just moved with that same slow, steady pace. Not limping, not stumbling, just walking like he knew where he was going now. I stood by the mailbox and watched him disappear down the road, his body melting into the dark until I couldn't see him anymore. I stayed there for a while, listening, but the night had gone quiet again. No shuffling in the corn, no footsteps, just the low sound of the fire still burning behind me. I never saw him again. No signs, no missing dog posters. I asked around, but no one had lost a mastiff, and no one knew of one being found either. It was like he'd come out of the field just for that moment, just long enough to find a light and a direction. Sometimes I still think about him, about where he came from, how long he'd been walking, what he'd been through. It's strange how something like that sticks with you. Not the scary part, not the not knowing what was coming through the corn, but the quiet part, the way he looked at me, the way he left without needing anything. I burned the rest of the brush pile that night, and when it was down to embers, I poured water over it and made sure everything was out. I went inside, locked the doors, and turned off all the lights. But even in the dark, I kept seeing him in my mind. That brindle coat, those tired eyes. He never came back, and I never figured out where he'd come from. But something about that night made the land feel different to me afterward. Like it had a memory now, like it remembered that quiet moment between a man and a dog who never exchanged a word. Just a look, just a nod, and then he was gone. We hiked in late on a Thursday afternoon, deeper into the woods than we'd ever been before. Me and Nate had planned this trip for weeks, Both of us wanted to get away from everything for a while. Work, people, traffic, noise. Nate had found this spot marked on an old trail map, a little hollow surrounded by thick pine and oak, about 5 miles off any marked trail. We had to cut through brush and even wade through a shallow creek to get there. It was tucked so far into the woods, we figured no one else would even know about it. That was part of the draw. We reached it a little before sunset, tired, sweaty, and covered in tiny scratches from the undergrowth. The clearing was perfect, flat, soft earth, a ring of trees all around, and a fire pit someone must have made years ago with big, smooth stones. No signs of recent use. No trash. No footprints. Just a quiet stillness and the smell of pine sap and moss. We set up our tents near the edge of the clearing, a few feet apart. His was green, mine was gray. We gathered wood, started a fire, cooked some kin stuff on a little burner, and talked about nothing. That first night, everything felt calm. Peaceful, even. It got cold after dark, and we zipped up in our tents and listened to the soft wind in the trees until we fell asleep. The next morning, when I crawled out of my tent and stretched, I noticed it immediately, a bright blue tent about 20 feet away from ours. Small, maybe for one person. I froze for a second, blinking at it. It hadn't been there yesterday when we arrived. I was sure of it. Nate was already up, crouched by the fire pit, making coffee. I looked at him, then back at the tent. It just sat there, zipped shut, no sound, no movement. We waited for a while that morning, kept expecting someone to come out, but no one did. After an hour, we stopped paying attention to it. Maybe someone had arrived in the middle of the night and set up quietly, though we hadn't heard anything. We tried not to let it bother us, but both of us kept glancing at it throughout the day. It just seemed off, not threatening, exactly, just strange. That night, we sat around a fire and drank a couple of beers, talking about old memories, girls we dated, dumb stuff from high school. Every once in a while, I'd look over at the blue tent. No light inside, no rustling, nothing. Just that silent blue shape sitting in the dark. The next morning, we noticed Nate's pack had been unzipped. Some of his food was missing: granola bars, jerky, a can of beans. At first, we thought maybe he'd forgotten that he'd eaten it or misplaced it, but later I realized a pair of my socks was gone too. They'd been drying on a low branch by my tent. We joked that maybe some raccoons had figured out how zippers worked, but it wasn't funny. The blue tent didn't have any fire smoke or footprints around it. Still no signs of life. Still zipped shut. We hadn't seen or heard anyone since we got there. The third night, I barely slept. Every crack of a twig made me sit up. I kept thinking about someone slipping into our sight while we were asleep, moving around quietly, taking things. We didn't keep anything valuable out, just food, clothes, gear, but it was the idea of someone creeping that close to us in the dark that unsettled me. By the next morning, both of our flashlights were dead. They'd had fresh batteries when we arrived. I checked and saw the backs had been twisted off and the batteries gone. We hadn't heard anything in the night. No footsteps, no tent zippers, nothing, just gone. I felt sick with unease, like we were being watched. But the woods were so still, so quiet. There were no birds chirping, no wind, just silence. That's when Nate said we should open the blue tent. Just see. He said it like he didn't want to, but needed to. I agreed. I had to know. We walked up to it slowly. The flap was still shut. I could see the zipper pull was halfway down, like it had been used. I reached out and grabbed it. My fingers were shaking. I slowly unzipped the flap and pulled it open. It was empty. No sleeping bag, no pillow, no clothes, just bare tent floor. But someone had been staying there. The inside smelled like old sweat and dirty fabric. There were faint marks in the thin dirt on the floor where someone had been lying. Small trash in the corners, an empty water bottle, a torn piece of granola bar wrapper, a single-use sock. No ID, no name tag, nothing to say who. But worse than that was what we found just behind the tent in the underbrush. Nate stepped around back and called me over. I followed, pushing through low branches. Tucked into a small hollow in the ground behind the tent was a pile. A hidden stash. Our missing stuff was there. My socks crumpled up. Nate's food wrappers. Our flashlight batteries. But there were other things too. Old wrappers. More socks. Other people's stuff. A ripped shirt. A plastic comb. A pocket knife. Some looked older, weather-worn. Some looked recent. Not ours. It wasn't just our things that had been taken. Someone had done this before, and maybe was still doing it. That was when the fear really settled in. Whoever was living here, whoever had set up that tent and then vanished, had been stealing from people who camped in this area, hiding their trail, staying silent, watching. I looked around at the woods, thick and still, and suddenly I could feel eyes on us, though I couldn't see a thing. The trees were too dense, shadows everywhere. We didn't talk. We packed up everything. Fast. I didn't even finish rolling up my tent. I just shoved it into my pack. We didn't stop for food or water. We just walked. For hours. I kept turning around, thinking I heard something behind us, but it was always nothing. Just branches, leaves, the occasional squirrel darting through. We finally reached the creek by late afternoon, crossed it without stopping, and kept moving until we hit the rough ATV path we'd used to get in. We didn't stop walking until we were back at Nate's truck, just before dark. My legs were sore, feet blistered, throat dry, but I didn't care. I felt safe again, at least a little, once we shut the truck doors. We drove the whole way back in silence. Neither of us knew what to say. There was no one to report it to. We hadn't seen a crime, technically, just some stolen food. But we both knew someone was out there, someone who didn't want to be found, who moved at night, who didn't light fires or make sound. Someone who watched and waited until campers were asleep. I've camped a lot in my life, still do sometimes, but never without checking the woods around me in every direction. Never without making sure I'm not being watched. And I never go as deep into the woods as we did that weekend. Because somewhere out there, there's someone who knows how to disappear in plain sight, who lives just on the edge of your campfire's glow. Quiet, patient, careful. Someone who never speaks, never shows their face, and only takes just enough that you don't notice until it's too late. But they're there. You can't hear them, but they're there. I had been out on the trail for 6 days. Just me, my pack, and the dirt under my boots. I needed a break. The stress back home had been piling up for months. Work deadlines, family stuff, bills, all of it. I planned this solo trip because I wanted silence. I wanted time to walk, sweat, eat freeze-dried food, and sleep under the stars. And that's what I got. The trail was remote. No cell service. No other hikers. I parked a small dirt lot off an old forest road, shouldered my gear, and started my loop. It took me deep through thick forest, rocky switchbacks, long ridge lines, and wet valleys. I kept to myself, took photos, filled my journal, stayed on trail. I didn't see another person the whole time. That's part of why I picked it. By the 5th night, I started feeling ready to go home. I was tired, sore, and craving real food. The last day was the longest stretch, almost 16 miles to get back to the trailhead. I woke up before the sun, packed my camp fast, and started walking in the blue light of early morning. The air smelled like pine and wet moss. I moved quickly, keeping my head down, counting miles in my head. I only stopped once to eat a protein bar near a little creek. I didn't hear anything out of place, just birds and wind and the soft sound of water moving over rocks. But looking back now, I think maybe I did feel something off. I ignored it at the time. You do that when you're tired. You push through it. When I came around the last bend and saw the trailhead parking lot, my first thought was relief. I saw my car parked where I left it, a green Subaru Outback, dusty but fine. But as I got closer, I saw the man. He was sitting on the hood of my car, elbows on his knees, head slightly down, but he wasn't asleep. He was watching me. I slowed down without realizing it. His clothes were dark, maybe a black or navy jacket and some kind of cargo pants. He had boots on, real hiking boots, not cheap sneakers. His hair was long, dark, and greasy looking, almost covering his eyes, but not quite. His skin was pale, and his face didn't show anything. No expression, just watching. I stopped about 20 feet from my car. My shoulders were aching under my pack. My throat was dry. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. He just sat there, staring. Still, I didn't know what to do. There was no one else around. No other cars. The nearest real road was almost 8 miles down a bumpy dirt track. No signal out here. I looked down at my phone anyway. No bars as expected. I kept it in my hand. just in case. I thought maybe he was lost, or crazy, or maybe waiting for someone else and just picked my car to sit on. But it didn't feel like that. There was something too still about him. Like he wasn't just sitting, he was waiting for me. I called out, asking if he needed help, but he didn't answer. He didn't move. I stayed where I was a little longer, then slowly walked toward the driver's side door. My key was in my hip pocket. I kept glancing at him. No change. When I got to the door, I looked down. My tires were flat, all four of them. I crouched beside the front one, sliced clean, straight through the sidewall. Not blown from where. Cut. I looked at the others. Same thing. For slashed tires. I stood up fast, my chest tightening. The man still didn't move. Just looked at me. I took a few steps back, then turned and started walking. Not toward him. Back up the trail. I didn't know what else to do. There was no signal. No other people. No radio in the car. I figured maybe if I hiked far enough, I'd get a bar of service, maybe find another hiker or a road crew or something. I walked fast, almost jogged. I kept looking back over my shoulder every few minutes. After about 20 minutes, I stopped and crouched behind a tree. Waited. I couldn't hear anything, but when I peeked around the trunk, I saw him. He was walking up the trail. Not fast, not running, just walking the same way I came. Same pace I was using. Calm, like he had all the time in the world. I stood up and started moving again. Faster this time. I was sweating, even though the sun hadn't fully risen. My legs were tired from the long day, but I forced them to keep going. I started cutting off the trail, angling through the woods. I figured maybe I could lose him that way, loop around, get back to the car, and lock myself inside. Maybe even sleep there until someone drove past in the morning. But he kept showing up. It didn't make sense. I cut left through dense trees, climbed a rocky ridge, crossed a stream, and waited. I didn't see him. I waited 15 minutes. Nothing. Then I moved again, heading east away from the trail entirely. I stopped again after maybe another mile. I sat behind a big fallen log, drank some water, tried my phone. Still no signal. I stayed there almost an hour. It was completely silent. Not even birds now. Then I heard the crunch of dry pine needles behind me. I didn't look. I just got up and ran. I left my water bottle behind. I didn't care. My backpack bounced hard against my shoulders. I ran through thorns, tripped once, got back up, kept running. My lungs were burning. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My legs didn't want to keep going, but I forced them. Finally, I came to a low clearing, an old trail or maybe a logging road. I followed it, hoping it would lead to something, anything. It curved downhill, winding through a shallow valley. That's when I saw the cabin. It was small, probably one room. Old, with peeling wood, broken windows, and a rusted-out chimney. I didn't care. I ran straight to it, yanked the door open. It was barely hanging on the hinges, and went inside. It was empty, just a rotted wooden table and a crushed metal chair. The floor sagged under my weight. I crouched behind the table and tried my phone again. Still no signal. I stayed there, barely breathing, heart pounding, ears tuned to every little sound outside. I waited until the sun started to set, the light coming in through the broken windows, turning gold and low. I thought maybe he had lost me. Maybe I could make it through the night, then hike out in the morning. But just as the last light was going, I heard the door creak open. It was slow, a small sound. Not forced, not rushed. Just opened. I didn't move. I stayed as still as I could behind the table. I could hear breathing. Heavy, steady, just inside the doorway. Then footsteps on the softwood. They came halfway in, then stopped. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. The light faded completely. I stayed in the dark, knees pulled to my chest, waiting. Hours passed. I could still hear him breathing. Then eventually, nothing. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. The cabin was empty. He was gone. I stepped outside. Everything was quiet. No tracks in the dirt. I didn't know where he went, or how he moved so quietly, or what he wanted. I walked for almost 6 hours before I found signal again. I didn't go back to the car. I called for help, gave him the coordinates, and waited. A ranger showed up a few hours later in a side-by-side. He didn't see anyone on the way in. When we got back to my car, it was untouched. Tires still slashed, but no sign of the man. They towed me out. I filed a report. The ranger said maybe it was a drifter or someone living off-grid. Maybe, But the way he followed me, calm, patient, no mistakes, it didn't feel like a maybe. It felt like a plan. I haven't hiked alone since. I had taken off work for a week just to get away from everything. No people, no cars, no buzzing phone. I picked a spot deep in the national forest, farther out than I'd ever gone before. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing near a stream about 9 miles from the nearest marked trail. I packed light but smart. Tent, knife, fire starting gear, water purifier, bare canister for food, all of it. I made sure I could handle a few days completely alone. That was the whole point. The first 2 days were peaceful. Mornings were quiet, the kind of quiet where you hear nothing but birds, insects, and the trees creaking if the wind was strong enough. I fished a bit, made small fires in the evenings, and mostly just sat around thinking about nothing. I didn't see another person, didn't hear a plane, just me and the woods. The third night, something strange happened. After I put out my fire, just like I always did before going into the tent, I was laying in my sleeping bag with the mesh window open for air. That's when I heard it. A whistle. Faint, broken, like someone trying to play a tune they didn't fully remember. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It echoed off the trees. At first I thought it might be the wind, but it wasn't that kind of sound. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. I sat up for a while listening. I kept telling myself it was another camper, maybe a mile or two off. Sound can travel weird in the forest. I knew that. I had read stories of people hearing voices from halfway across the valley. I tried to ignore it, but the fact that it started after I had put the fire out, that stuck with me. It lasted for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped all at once. The next day, I explored a little farther upstream, climbed a ridge to get a view of the area. No tents, no smoke, nothing. If someone else was out there, they were being real quiet about it. I didn't see any tracks either. Just deer, some raccoon prints, and maybe a coyote. But no boot marks. I shook it off, told myself not to overthink it. Night 4, same thing. As soon as I doused the fire and zipped myself into the tent, it started again. The same broken whistling. It was the same tune, or almost the same, but this time it was closer. Not close enough to pinpoint, but definitely nearer than before. I stayed still, breathing shallow. I had my knife next to me, but what was I going to do? Go out looking for whoever was doing it? Risk getting lost or hurt? It stopped again after a few minutes, but this time I didn't sleep well. Every little twig snap outside made me flinch. I started to wonder if someone was watching me. It didn't feel like an animal. Animals don't whistle. And even if it was a person, why would they be doing that every night? Why wait for the fire to go out? Why get closer? By the 5th night, I was on edge. I thought about packing up and heading back to the truck, but I had hiked in so far, and there was a part of me that didn't want to admit I was getting scared. I stayed up later than usual, sat by the fire longer. It was around midnight when I finally put the fire out. I sat there in the dark for a while, just to see if it would start again. It did, but this time, it started barely a minute after the fire died. I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Whoever it was, they were watching, waiting. It was the same broken tune, but now it was even closer. I could tell it was coming from downhill toward the trees on the edge of the clearing. My clearing. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe heavy. Just listened, staring out into the dark like I'd be able to see anything. It lasted longer this time, maybe 10 minutes. Then it faded. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I looked for signs again. Walked the edge of the woods. Checked the trail behind me. Nothing. No boot prints, no drop gear. Whoever was doing it was careful, or they knew how to move through the woods without leaving a trace. And that thought made it worse. I was dealing with someone who wanted to stay hidden. I spent the whole 6th day uneasy, kept looking over my shoulder, started hearing little things, twigs snapping, the hush of branches brushing together, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Everything fell off. I told myself I'd leave the next morning, just hike straight out and get to the truck by sundown. But when the sun dipped again, I was stuck. No way was I going to hike at night through the woods with whoever or whatever was out there. That night, I skipped the fire. I didn't want to give them a signal. I ate a cold dinner, stayed in the tent early, and kept the knife gripped tight in my hand. Hours passed. It was quiet for a long time. So quiet it made my ears ring. I started to think maybe they gave up. Maybe they moved on. Then I heard it, but not the whistle. Breathing. Soft, steady, right outside the tent wall. Not moving. Just there. It was the kind of breathing you don't hear unless everything else is dead silent. I didn't dare move. Didn't make a sound. I lay there frozen, heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it. It went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. No footsteps, no talking, just slow, steady breathing inches away from my head. The tent fabric was thin. I could have reached out and touched whoever it was, or they could have reached in, but they didn't. Eventually, the breathing stopped. Not all at once. It just slowly faded as if the person, whoever they were, backed away into the woods. I waited another hour before I even sat up. I stayed awake the rest of the night with my knife across my lap, facing the door of the tent. I didn't hear the whistling again. At dawn, I packed up everything fast. Didn't eat. Didn't even filter more water. I just shoved everything into my pack, tore down the tent, and started hiking. I didn't stop, not even to rest. I made it back to the truck by early afternoon. My legs were cramping, and I was lightheaded from not eating, but I didn't care. I just got in and drove. I don't know who it was. I never saw them. I never heard that whistle again after I left that forest. But I do know this. It wasn't some casual hiker or harmless camper. They knew what they were doing. They stayed just far enough away to keep me unsure, kept the pressure on until I was too scared to think straight. And when they finally came close, they didn't do anything. They just let me know they could. That was enough. I haven't gone camping since. We parked on the side of the gravel road just after noon. The sign was old, nailed to a cracked post that leaned slightly toward the trees. It read "Trail Closed" in faded red paint, but someone had spray painted a thin line through the words. Dylan had found a forum online weeks ago where people talked about a hidden waterfall deep in these woods, off trail, not on any maps. They said it was beautiful and untouched, but the trail leading there had been closed for years. That didn't stop us. There were 5 of us. Dylan, always the one pushing the boundaries, led the way with a printed satellite map folded in his pocket. Nate and Zoe were behind him, always together. I walked a few steps behind them with Lily, who kept pulling her sleeves over her hands, nervous from the start. It was hot, humid, and the forest was dense. The further we went, the less it felt like a trail. At first, the path was clear, just overgrown from lack of use. Grass reaching up to our knees, low branches brushing our faces. But soon it narrowed. Fallen logs blocked the way, and the underbrush grew thick. You had to step carefully to avoid holes in uneven ground. We were sweating within 20 minutes, biting insects swarming us. The air smelled like damp soil and pine. We passed old markers now and then, wooden stakes with yellow ribbon, cracked and sun-bleached. None of us knew if they were official or not. Dylan checked the map often, saying we were close, just a little further. The canopy above us thickened, the light barely reaching the forest floor. The only sound was our boots, crunching leaves, and the constant buzz of insects. After maybe 2 hours of hiking, things changed. It started with something small. Nate tripped over a thin wire strung low between 2 trees. He caught himself on a branch, muttering under his breath, but we all saw it. A tripwire, not natural. Someone had put it there on purpose. We all froze. The forest suddenly felt too quiet. We stood in a loose circle, scanning the woods. There was no movement, no sound but the wind. Dylan tried to brush it off, probably some hunters trapped from years ago, but none of US believed that. The wire was clean, taut, new. We moved slower after that, eyes on the ground, on the trees. Another 30 minutes in, we found a set of sharpened sticks set in a shallow pit, leaves piled over the top. Crude, but dangerous. The points were darkened at the tips, burnt or stained. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't abandoned. Someone had built it with care. And recently, then came the warnings. Little things. Pieces of bark with crude shapes carved into them. Stick figures with X's for eyes. A branch hung low across the trail with a strip of cloth tied to the end, stained dark. Rocks stacked in weird, unnatural piles beside the path. A tree with its bark stripped in a wide, vertical line, as if something had been dragged against it. We didn't speak. We just kept moving. No one laughed anymore. Zoe started glancing behind us every couple steps. Lily didn't even try to hide her fear. And I kept thinking about how far we had come. How easy it would be to get turned around if we had to rush back. The woods were endless in every direction. Everything looked the same. Around 4 in the afternoon, we stopped for water near a shallow stream. Our clothes were soaked in sweat. There were no signs of the waterfall, no sound of rushing water. Dylan admitted we might have gone off course a little. The map didn't show this stream. That's when I noticed it across the stream, in the tree line, something moved. Not an animal. It was slow, careful, not crashing through the brush like a deer would. More like someone stepping deliberately, staying just out of view. I didn't tell the others. I didn't need to. Zoe noticed it too. I saw her eyes go wide, fixed on the same spot. We left the stream without resting. No one complained. From that point on, the forest didn't feel empty anymore. There was a weight to it. I could feel eyes on us. Every twig snap made us flinch. We tried to walk faster, but we didn't know where we were going anymore. Dylan stopped checking the map. He just pushed forward, pretending to know the way. As the sun started to dip, we found another warning, this one clearer than the rest. A large X made of branches tied together with twine, stuck in the ground like a signpost. Below it, in the dirt, someone had carved a message with a stick or knife. Turn back. The ground around it was disturbed. Footprints. Too many to count. All human. We turned around then. No one said a word. It just happened like we all agreed without speaking. Our steps were faster, careless. We weren't looking for traps anymore. We just wanted out. But the way back didn't feel right. We passed things we didn't remember. Trees that looked unfamiliar. Logs we hadn't climbed over before. It was like the forest had shifted behind us. Lily tripped on something and hit the ground hard. When I helped her up, her knee was cut open. Not just scraped, sliced. We found what did it. A small, rusted metal edge sticking out of the ground, half buried. Someone had set it there, low and hidden. We were being funneled. That was the word that came to mind. Herded like animals. Every time we tried to go a new direction, we ran into more signs. Wires, stakes, even a small stack of bones laid out neatly on a log. Not human bones, but cleaned, arranged. A warning. It was almost dark now. The sky turned orange between the trees, and long shadows crawled across the ground. We were walking in silence, too tired to talk. Then Zoe stopped suddenly, pointing to a ridge up ahead. At the top, just for a second, I saw him. A figure. Human. Standing still, watching. He wasn't close, maybe 60 yards, but clear enough to make out. He wore something like camouflage or rags. I couldn't see a face. And then he stepped backward, disappeared into the trees like he'd never been there. We didn't chase. We didn't yell. We just kept moving, even faster. By the time full dark hit, we were walking with our phone flashlights, trying not to blind each other. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Every sound felt like it was following us. Then, finally, we saw the road. I don't know how we found it. Maybe we circled back. Maybe we got lucky. But we came out near the car, stumbling out of the woods like we'd been spit out. We didn't stop. We just got in, slammed the doors, and Dylan drove like hell, headlights bouncing off the trees. No one said a thing until we were halfway back to town. We never reported it. What would we say? That we trespassed on a closed trail and someone didn't like it? But there's someone out there living in those woods, building traps and leaving warnings? Who would believe that? We never went back. The map got deleted. The forum thread disappeared a few weeks later, probably removed by a mod, or maybe something else. But I still think about those traps, the precision of them, the patience, and that figure at the top of the ridge. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood still, and he watched us leave. I went out into the woods that morning without any real reason. I wasn't planning to camp or hike. I just needed a break from everything. Work, noise, people. I lived in a small town, and about 7 miles out, there was a patch of forest that not many people went to. There were no trail signs, no benches, no maintained paths. Just old trees, patches of brambles, and soft ground covered with pine needles. I'd only ever gone a couple hundred feet in, but that morning I decided I was going to walk deeper than usual. I want to feel like I had gone somewhere that no one else had been for a long time. It wasn't even cloudy or creepy when I went. It was bright, quiet, and still. No wind, just hot and dry, with the sun shining straight down through the gaps in the canopy. I didn't bring much. Just a small backpack with a water bottle, a folding knife I always carried, and a granola bar. I left my phone in the truck. That was stupid, but at the time it made sense. I didn't want distractions. I locked up the truck, tossed the keys into my backpack, and stepped off the edge of the gravel pull-off into the trees. The first hour was calm. It felt like what I wanted. Quiet. The only noises were birds up high and the sound of my own boots pressing into the dry pine needles. I wasn't following a trail. I just kept moving forward in a general direction, stepping around stumps and pushing past low branches. A couple of times I stopped and listened just to take in the stillness. It felt clean, like the kind of silence you don't get near roads or towns. But somewhere around an hour and a half in, I realized I hadn't paid attention to my direction at all. The forest looked the same everywhere I turned. Same trees, same kind of undergrowth, same patches of fern and moss. I didn't feel worried right then, but I did take a moment to try and figure out where the sun was. It was high overhead, not leaning in any obvious direction. I figured if I turned around and started walking straight back, I'd eventually hit the road. That's when I started to notice small things that didn't sit right. First, there were no animals. I hadn't seen any deer or squirrels the whole time, not even a rabbit. That felt strange. There were birds early on, but now even they were gone. I stopped again and listened. Nothing. Just that heavy, dry kind of silence, the kind where your own breathing sounds loud. I looked behind me, trying to see my own tracks. I couldn't. The pine needles were thick and soft and didn't hold much of print. I started walking again, slower now, try to remember if I had passed any distinct features on the way in. Large rocks, dead trees, anything, but there was nothing. Everything looked the same. I kept walking in what I thought was the direction back. Maybe 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't come out near the road. Instead, the trees got a little denser. The ferns got thicker. I stepped around a fallen log and paused. That's when I saw the pile. It looked like a campfire pit at first. Just a round clearing with blackened, burned pieces of wood in the center. But there was no ring of stones, and the wood was too large, like logs stacked crisscrossed in a rough pile. There was ash all around the ground. But what made it feel wrong wasn't the wood. It was what was caught between the logs. Scraps of cloth, burned, torn pieces of something once white or pale blue. I crouched a little closer. It wasn't just fabric. I could see melted plastic. A corner of something that looked like the side of a backpack. Part of a rubber sole. I stood up fast. My hands were sweating even though the air was dry. The heat of the sun felt hotter all of a sudden. I backed away from the pile and tried to walk faster. Not running, but almost. I didn't know what I had just seen, but it was too clean to be old. The ash hadn't been rained on. The ground wasn't damp or overgrown with moss. Someone had been there. Maybe recently. I kept walking. Then I noticed something else. A thin cord. It was stretched between two trees at about ankle height. Almost invisible unless the sun hit it at just the right angle. I froze, followed it with my eyes. It ran to a small piece of metal stuck into the bark of one tree. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it looked like the kind of thing you'd attach a motion sensor to. Not a hunting snare. Something different. More like a tripwire. I didn't touch it. I stepped over it slowly and kept moving, eyes on the ground. The quiet was worse now. Every crack of a twig under my boots sounded too loud. I stopped again, maybe 15 minutes later. My legs were starting to ache. I drank some of my water and sat on a low rock. That's when I noticed something even worse. A pair of boot prints. Not mine. Too wide. The sole pattern was different, thicker, like work boots or military boots. The heel had a square pattern that I didn't recognize, and they were deeper, like the person was heavier or carrying gear. They were fresh, edges still sharp in the dirt. They led past where I was sitting, heading in the direction I had just come from. I stared at them for a long time. Then I looked behind me and saw more. A second set, maybe 20 feet back near a patch of ferns. They were older, partly covered in needles, but still visible. Not like a trail. More like someone had stood in one spot for a while, then moved. I started walking again. I moved fast, didn't care about stepping on things now. I just wanted out. I turned in a direction I hadn't tried before, thinking maybe if I angled to the left a bit, I'd run into the road. I kept going for what felt like an hour. Still trees. Still no sign of anything human except those prints. Then I found a shack. It wasn't big, just a square building made of mismatched boards. No paint, no windows. The roof was low and covered with old sheet metal. There were nails sticking out all over, some bent, some rusted. I stood behind a tree and stared at it. There was a blue plastic barrel beside the door and an old wheelbarrow half buried in the dirt. No smoke, no sound. The door was closed, but I could see that it didn't sit right in the frame like it had been forced a few times. There were more boot prints around it, some going in, fewer coming out. I didn't go near it. I turned and walked the opposite direction, faster than before. My heart was hammering. I didn't know who had built that place or what it was used for, but I didn't want to find out. I kept moving uphill now, pushing through thicker brush, not caring about scratches on my arms or face. Eventually, I came to a small rise. From the top, I could see a break in the trees, a faint line of something pale and straight. I moved toward it, crashing through undergrowth. When I reached it, I saw it was the road. Just a two-lane stretch of old asphalt, but it felt like the safest place I'd ever seen. My truck was still a long way off. I had come out maybe 2 miles down, but I didn't care. I started walking the edge of the road, watching the woods the whole time, listening for any sound behind me. I didn't hear anything. When I got back to the truck, I checked the locks. Nothing touched. The sun was lower now. I climbed in, turned the key, and drove straight home without stopping. Later that night, I thought about calling someone. The police maybe. But what would I say? That I found a pile of burned clothes in a shack? That I saw boot prints? I didn't even know where exactly I had been. There were no trail markers, no way to describe the location. And honestly, I didn't want to go back out there to try and find it again. I've never told anyone about it in person. Never went back to that part of the woods. And now, every time I pass a patch of forest that doesn't have a sign or a trail or a fence, I wonder if there's another shack like that somewhere inside. Another pile. Another wire strung between trees. Sometimes I think about how quiet it was and how whoever left those boot prints had been watching. Maybe not the whole time, but long enough. Long enough to know I was out there alone. I took the job because I needed to get away. That's really all it was. I'd been working in a loud, airless office in the middle of a crowded city, dealing with numbers and screens and fluorescent lights that never turned off. I saw a posting online one night for a summer firewatch position in the Rockies. Solitary work, beautiful views, quiet. No phone service, no neighbors, just a wooden tower tucked into the middle of forested wilderness. I filled out the application that same night and got a call back 2 days later. A week after that, I was flown into a ranger station and then driven 2 hours up a gravel road before being handed keys and a laminated map. They pointed me to a footpath and said the tower was 3 miles in. That walk-in was the first time I realized how alone I'd be. The woods were deep and thick, stretching endlessly in every direction. It was hot and quiet except for the buzzing of insects and the occasional bird. My boots kicked up dry dust. The trail wasn't well marked, just a barely visible path through brush and pine needles. I kept turning around expecting to see the ranger's truck still waiting behind the trees, but it was gone. The tower itself was tall, creaky, made of gray wood and rusty nails. 40 feet up, with a narrow staircase winding around it. The cabin on top was small, but had everything I needed. A cot, a desk, a radio, shelf for food, and big glass windows on all sides. There was a little stove, a tank for rainwater, and a trapdoor in the floor that led to stairs. I didn't mind that there was no plumbing. I was used to roughing it during childhood camping trips. I settled in quickly. I set up my books, my journal, some old photos. My job was simple. Scan the horizon with the binoculars a few times a day, look for smoke, log the weather, check in on a shortwave once every morning and evening. For the first 2 weeks, it was exactly what I hoped it would be. Peaceful. I didn't see another human being or hear a single engine. I spent my mornings with coffee and long walks down the trail, my afternoons reading or sketching what I saw from the windows. Evenings were still and beautiful, orange lights stretching over the treetops, the sounds of the woods turning more active as the sun dipped below the ridges. Then one evening, right before sunset, I saw it smoke. It was thin and low, coming up from behind a patch of trees about half a mile west of the tower. I grabbed the binoculars and tried to see if it was a campfire or a lightning strike or something else, but I couldn't tell from that distance. There wasn't supposed to be anyone out here. No trails led that way. No one had checked in for a backcountry permit. I waited a few minutes, thinking maybe it would fade away, but it didn't. So I packed a small bag with water, a flashlight, and my map. I headed down the stairs and bushwhacked toward the smoke. It wasn't easy walking. Lots of low branches, soft ground, uneven rocks. The forest was quiet in a way that started to bother me. The smoke was still rising faintly, but by the time I got to the spot, the smell was stronger than the sight. It was an animal, a deer, I think, burned badly. It was lying in a small clearing, its legs twisted unnaturally, the fur curled and blackened. The fire hadn't spread. There were no scorched trees, no hot coals, just this one body in the middle of the grass. The smoke was coming from what was left of its ribcage. But what stuck with me more than the body was what was around it. A circle of boot prints. Deep fresh. They didn't lead anywhere. Not into or out of the clearing. Just round and round, over and over, like someone had been walking in a loop for a long time. I turned around and hiked back faster than I came. By the time I got back to the tower, the sky was dark. I climbed the stairs, shut the trapdoor behind me, and locked it. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the wood made me sit up in my cot. I didn't hear any voices, but I kept thinking about those boot prints. Who walks in circles around a burning animal in the woods? The next day was normal again, almost enough to make me think I'd imagined it. But that night, just as I was lying down, I heard something. The stairs. The stairs on the tower are loud. Old, uneven wood. You can't go up or down them without making noise. That night, I heard the stairs creak twice, then stop. I held my breath, then another creak, then silence again. I sat up and waited, barely breathing, my eyes locked on the trapdoor in the middle of the floor. Nothing. No more creaks, no knock, nothing. I stayed awake all night. The following day, I radioed in during the morning check-in and said I thought I might have seen some signs of trespassers. The guy on the other end of the line just said to stay alert and keep logging it. No one was going to come up and check unless there was a real emergency. That night, I heard it again. The stairs. But more this time. More steps, heavier. Not fast, just slow and steady. Up and up. I stood there frozen by the trapdoor, holding a kitchen knife I'd brought from the drawer, knowing it wouldn't matter much if someone really wanted in. The creaking stopped at the top of the stairs, right under the trapdoor. Then there was a long, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor below. Then nothing. I didn't open the door until daylight. When I finally looked, there was nothing on the stairs. But I noticed something strange. A scratch, fresh, maybe from a knife or something sharper, running across the door. And the wood around the trapdoor latch looked slightly darker, like something what had touched it. I stopped walking the trails after that. I stayed in the tower during the day and kept the windows locked at night. On the third night, after I saw the fire, I heard something above me. The roof of the tower is just a tin-covered ceiling, with a crawl space above it for maintenance. No one's supposed to go up there. I didn't even think you could. But I heard it, soft, heavy footsteps, like someone crawling across the beams. Then a tap. Not loud, not fast. Just one tap, then another, like fingers brushing the ceiling. I turned on every light I had. Flashlights, lanterns, everything. I pointed them at the ceiling and the corners of the room and kept them on all night. The next morning, I found a trail of boot prints in the dirt below the tower. They circled the base, then circled again. For loops, 5. Then they stopped. No trail leading in, no trail leading out. The woods had been disturbed in a perfect ring. That's when I knew someone was messing with me. Not just sneaking around, not stealing, watching. The ranger station didn't answer the radio that morning. I tried again that evening. Nothing. I don't know if it was the radio itself or something else. But I was on my own now. That night, I blocked the trapdoor with the heaviest furniture I could move. The desk, the cot, the storage crates. I put a hammer next to me and didn't sleep. The footsteps came again, up the stairs, around the platform, then above me. I sat in the corner with the hammer in my lap, teeth clenched, shaking, until morning. When light finally came through the windows, I took everything I needed, water, food, a flare gun, and left. I didn't go back down a trail. I went in the other direction. I followed the slope east down the ravine where there were no trails, but I knew the Ranger Road had to be miles away in that direction. I didn't stop. I kept going until my legs gave out, and then I crawled until I could walk again. I was picked up the next afternoon by a ranger patrol. They thought I'd fallen or gotten sick. I didn't say much. I didn't want to hear them say no one else had been there. I didn't want to see their faces when they heard what I saw. They sent someone to check the tower later. They said it looked fine, just empty, nothing unusual. No signs of break-in, no blood, just some footprints around the base, too degraded to track, and the burnt remains of an animal found a half-mile west. I never went back. I didn't collect my last paycheck. I didn't answer follow-up calls. Sometimes I still wake up at night hearing wood creaking or that dragging sound under my bed. But I don't live near trees anymore. I don't live near anything. I just want to be somewhere I can see the ground in every direction. And when I sleep, I keep the lights on. Always. I have been working fire watch duty in the southern range of Pine Rock for 4 years. Our section had 2 towers, spaced about 6 miles apart, connected by a single dirt trail that cut through thick forest. You couldn't drive it. Too many fallen trees, tight turns, erosion. You had to hike it. My tower, Tower 9, was older. The wood groaned in the wind, and sometimes I could hear squirrels in the ceiling. Nothing dangerous, just part of the job. The other tower, Tower 10, was newer, built on a ridge across from mine. From my cabin window, I could see its silhouette through the trees during the day, and at night, its blinking signal light. Each of us rotated weekly, 7 days on, 7 days off. During the shift, the other person went into town or did repair work down at base. But when both towers were staffed, we had mandatory radio check-ins 3 times a day. Once at 7 a.m., then again at 3 p.m., and finally, just after 9 p.m. It kept things consistent. Doug was the other ranger. He was an older guy, late 40s I'd say. Former Army. Solid worker, didn't talk much. We'd pass each other every Sunday on the trail. Say a quick hello, swap quick notes, weather patterns, anything strange we'd seen, updates from a station. Never more than 5 minutes. Then we continue on. That week, I'd hiked up on a Sunday morning like normal. Found the tower clean, stocked, everything in order. Doug was halfway down the trail when we crossed paths. He said nothing strange had happened during his week, though he mentioned hearing something moving in the woods a few nights in a row. He figured it was just deer or maybe a bear. Nothing worth logging. I made a mental note and kept walking. The first 3 days were uneventful. I logged a few fires out by the northern valley. Distant ones, well outside our range. It was dry and hot, too hot for May, and the smell of smoke traveled far. I kept my binoculars nearby and scanned the ridges often. Doug would radio in at the usual times. We never said much, just confirmed we were still alive and looking. Just protocol. Then Thursday came. 7 a.m. I made my call. Nothing. I gave it 10 minutes and tried again. Still no reply. I wasn't too worried yet. Radios go out all the time. Static, weather, dead batteries. I tried again at 3 p.m. Still nothing. I started to get a little annoyed. Skipping 2 check-ins wasn't normal, even if the radio was down. We had hand-cranked chargers for backup. By 9 p.m., I sat with the radio turned all the way up. Nothing but silence. Then static. Then silence again. I didn't sleep well that night. Just after midnight, I looked out toward the other ridge. I often did that, just habit scanning the forest. That's when I saw the light. A single flash, then a pause, then another, then 2 close together. At first, I thought it was the tower light flickering, but the pattern didn't match. The tower signal was automatic, 1 long blink every 15 seconds. This was faster. It looked like someone was using a flashlight. Not random either. I counted. 1 blink, 2 blinks, pause, 1, 2, 1. I squinted hard through the trees, but I couldn't see much more. Just those small glints, like someone signaling. I stayed up almost the whole night, watching. The light kept flashing. Not constant, just every few minutes. Like it was waiting for me to notice. But I didn't flash anything back. I didn't want whoever that was to know I'd seen it. The next morning, I made the hike. I left at 6 a.m. sharp. It was already warm and humid, and the trail was soft in places. The woods felt too quiet. No wind, barely any bird calls. Even the insects seemed quiet. I walked slow, checking for tracks, broken branches, anything out of place. The forest was thick on either side, heavy with green and wet moss. By the time I got near the base of Tower 10, I noticed something off. Usually Doug would have a kettle going or be outside splitting wood. The place was silent. No smoke from the chimney. No sound at all. I called out once, just loud enough to announce myself. Nothing. I climbed the stairs. The door to the cabin at the top was unlocked. That's when I really started to feel weird. Doug was a stickler about locking the hatch. Inside, it looked normal at first. Clean, organized. Coffee mug on the table. Bed made. His pack was leaning against the wall, but unzipped. I looked inside. Still had his sleeping bag, stove, even his flashlight. His boots were missing, though. That didn't make sense. I looked around again, slower this time. That's when I noticed the mud. Wet boot prints. One set, coming in through the hatch. No other prints, just that one line of muddy steps. It came from the outside and ended near the desk. I followed the line with my eyes. Then I looked out the window. Down below, the dirt around the base of the stairs was disturbed, like someone had stood there for a while. Then I saw the trail, faint prints coming from the woods. Not the trail I came from. These came from the backside, a place with no trail at all. Thick, rough terrain. People didn't come from that way, not unless they were trying not to be seen. I climbed down and walked a short loop around the base. The prints circled the tower once, then disappeared back into the tree line. I followed them for maybe 50 feet before they vanished in the thick brush. The ground was soft but spotty, and the sun was already drying it up. But I could tell one thing for sure. They were the same boot treads as Doug's. Same exact kind of soles. Same wear pattern. One toe slightly dragged, just like I remember when we passed each other on Sunday. But if the boots were here, inside the tower, and the prints went to and from the woods, then who the hell was wearing them? I searched the tower again, top to bottom. Nothing. No sign of a struggle. No torn fabric. No blood. His pack was untouched. No radio damage. Everything looked normal, except that he was gone, and the boots weren't on his feet. I hiked back in silence. Didn't bother calling over the radio. I already knew it wouldn't work. When I got back to my tower, I sat down and wrote everything I saw in a logbook. Every small detail. Then I locked all the doors, pulled the blinds, and waited. That night, just after midnight, I saw the flashing again. Same pattern. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, 1. It was coming from somewhere lower than the tower now. Not quite the ridge. Like someone was halfway down the slope. Closer. The next morning, I radioed base and requested pickup. Told them Doug had missed 3 check-ins and wasn't at his post. They said they'd send someone out in 2 days. Said the roads were washed out and the trail had a few down trees. I didn't argue. I kept the tower locked until they arrived. The lights kept flashing each night, always around midnight. Never random, always that same strange rhythm. When a relief team finally came, I hiked down and didn't look back. I told them everything. They said they'd investigate and radio me once they had news. That was 4 weeks ago. They never found Doug. Not a single trace. But I keep thinking about those muddy prints. The ones that came out of the woods and walked straight into the tower. And the ones that went right back in. I know what I saw. I know the boots were inside. But I don't know who or what walked them back out. I decided to go solo camping in Arizona in late October. I'd done solo trips before, but always in places closer to home, forests, lakes, even some deep desert stretches near Nevada. But this time I wanted to push a little further out to really feel that isolation. Arizona had always fascinated me. The red rocks, the dry air, the endless sky at night. I researched a few less popular trails and chose one that followed an old ranch route a few miles off any paved roads. I planned to hike 5 miles in, set up camp for a couple nights, and just disconnect. I packed light, but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, dry food for 4 days, extra water, first aid kit, multi-tool, a solar power bank, 2 sets of fresh batteries, and most importantly, a compact radio with GPS and a built-in weather scanner. I also brought a flashlight, a headlamp, and my phone, though I expected no signal out there. Everything was fully charged the night before. I double-checked every battery, every device. I had backup power and backups for the backups. I was prepared. I drove out early and parked at a small pullout near the trailhead. There were no other cars. It was a weekday and late in the season, so I wasn't surprised. I strapped on my pack and started walking. The trail was dry and rocky, weaving through dusty hills and patches of cactus. After about 2 hours, I left the trail and headed further west toward a shallow ravine I had marked on my map. It was flat enough to pitch a tent and surrounded by low ridges that offered a bit of cover. No trees, just scattered shrubs and a few scraggly mesquites, but I liked how quiet it felt. By the time I set up camp, the sun was dipping low and the temperature had started to drop. That first night went fine. I ate a protein bar, drank some water, and sat outside my tent with the radio on low, scanning for weather updates. Nothing unusual, clear skies, cold temps, no storms. The moon was bright and full, casting everything in a pale glow. It got cold fast after dark, and by 10 p.m., I was zipped up in my sleeping bag. I left the radio on next to me, not for music or news, just as a familiar sound. Its soft hum helped me sleep. The second day was uneventful. I walked around the area, followed a dry creek bed for a couple miles, and saw what looked like coyote tracks in the sand. Not unusual. I didn't see or hear any other animals. No planes, no disten traffic. Just complete stillness, like the desert had swallowed everything. I liked it that way. That afternoon, I read a paperback I'd brought, boiled water for some dehydrated food, and sat in the shade of a boulder. It wasn't until nightfall that things changed. It started small. I turned on the radio around sunset and noticed it didn't light up. I checked the power button. Nothing. I assumed the batteries had died, so I swapped them with a fresh set. Still nothing. I grabbed my flashlight to get a better look, but the beam flickered once, then died completely. That's when I felt a sliver of unease. I wasn't panicking yet. Things fail sometimes. It's easy to get careless with battery life out in the cold. I took my phone out, figuring I'd check the time. The screen was black. I pressed the side button. No response. I held it down. Nothing. I remember sitting back on my heels, surrounded by silence, looking at the 3 devices I had just used yesterday, and suddenly none of them were working. My first thought was that the cold had drained the batteries faster than usual. That happens sometimes. But I had my solar power bank, fully charged, packed in my bag. I pulled it out and plugged in my phone. As soon as I connected it, a loud burst of static blared from the phone speaker. I yanked it out of the charger. The static stopped. I sat still for a long moment, just holding the phone in my lap. Then I plugged it back in. Again, sharp, violent static. No voice, no transmission, just a wall of white noise, so loud it felt physical. I unplugged it again. My mouth had gone dry. I picked up the radio, turned it on again, hoping maybe it had just been the batteries earlier. Same static. No blinking light this time. Just noise. I don't know what scared me more, the sound or the fact that it didn't make any sense. Electronics fail, sure. Batteries die, but not like this. Not all at once. Not when they worked perfectly the day before. And not when they go dead, just to come alive again with nothing but static. And it wasn't soft static like weak signal fuzz. It was intense, like something was jamming everything nearby. I felt a deep, physical wrongness. I had no connection to anything. No GPS. No light. No clock. Nothing. I didn't wait to see if it would get worse. I stuffed everything in my bag as fast as I could. My tent was still up, but I didn't bother breaking it down. I left it there, grabbed my essentials, water, pack, power bank, knife, and started hiking out. I didn't even have a flashlight. Only the moonlight guided me. Luckily, the sky was clear, and the trail was just visible enough to follow if I moved slowly. My heart pounded the whole time. I kept stopping to listen. The desert was too quiet. I couldn't hear anything. Not wind, not insects, not even distant coyotes. Just the crunch of my boots on the dry dirt and the occasional rattle of gravel. At one point, I heard something behind me. Not close, not loud, but enough to make me stop cold. A small shuffle, then silence again. I turned, looking back down the slope I had just climbed, but saw nothing. I stood still for at least 2 minutes, trying not to breathe too loudly, but the sound didn't come again. I kept moving. I made it back to the trailhead a little before dawn. My legs were shaking, partly from exhaustion, partly from nerves. My truck was still there. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute with my head against the steering wheel. Then I turned the key. The truck started fine. The dashboard clock blinked on. It was just after 5 a.m. I plugged in my phone again. This time, it lit up immediately, fully charged. The radio worked perfectly. Clear signal, quiet hum. Just like before. The flashlight flicked on without hesitation. Everything worked. I didn't drive home right away. I pulled out onto the main road and drove to the nearest gas station about 20 miles down. I got coffee, stood inside for a long time near the warmers, and watched the sun come up over the highway. I tested everything again. Phone, power bank, radio, not a single issue. I don't know what happened out there. I didn't tell the gas station clerk anything. I didn't tell my friends when I got back, either. Not at first. I just said the trip got cut short. Later I tried to explain it, but how do you describe something like that without sounding paranoid? It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't some made-up desert monster. It felt like someone had flipped a switch on everything electronic I owned, all at once. Not to kill it, but to interrupt it, jam it, interfere, like there was a signal being broadcast deliberately, and it was localized, only out there in that one spot. I looked up jamming devices when I got back. Military-grade ones exist. Some can disrupt GPS, phone signals, radios. They're usually not sold to civilians. They're illegal to use, especially on public land. But I wasn't near a base. I was at least 40 miles from any major installation, and there were no towers, no antennas, no sign of anyone out there at all. Whatever shut my gear down was precise. It didn't burn out the tech. It didn't drain batteries permanently. It just made everything useless while I was there. And that static, I can still hear if I think about it too hard. Not just white noise. It had texture. It had a rhythm almost under the hiss, like something trying to come through, but never quite making it. I never went back. I don't plan to. I drive past the turnoff now and then on my way through Arizona. The dirt road still disappears into the hills the same way. Sometimes I wonder if the tent's still there, collapsed and half buried in sand. And I still wonder, who would set up something like that, so deep in the desert? What were they trying to hide? Or worse, what were they trying to catch? I matched with him on a Wednesday night. I remember because I had just come back from a long shift at the office and didn't feel like doing anything except curling up on the couch and scrolling through dating apps. His profile showed up after maybe 5 or 6 swipes. He looked decent, not movie star attractive, but clean and put together. His name said Daniel. He worked in finance, and he lived just a couple of neighborhoods over from me. He had a few photos, one in front of a lake, one at a coffee shop, one in a suit with a drink in his hand. His smile was relaxed, not forced. His bio said he liked hiking, reading true crime books, and cooking. It all sounded safe, normal, maybe even a little boring, which was exactly what I wanted at that point in my life. I'd dated enough emotionally unavailable guys and loud party types. I just wanted someone who would show up when they said they would. I swiped right, and within minutes we matched. He messaged me first, something simple like, "Hey, how's your week going?" The conversation felt natural. Not too intense, not flirty in a gross way. Just back and forth small talk. He told me he'd grown up in the area, went to school up north, came back to be closer to family. I told him about my job in marketing, about my new apartment, about how I spent my weekends mostly reading or baking or going on walks alone. He seemed genuinely interested in the small things, like the kind of books I liked or how I made my coffee in the morning. Over the next few days, we kept talking. Every morning, there'd be a good morning message. Every night, a sleep well. It felt stable. We didn't jump into anything too fast. We took our time. After about a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee that Saturday. Not dinner, not drinks, just coffee at a quiet place in the late morning. We met at a small cafe tucked into a corner of a tree-lined street. It was warm that day, sunny, but not too hot. I got there early, sat by the window, and waited. He walked in wearing jeans and a light gray t-shirt, sunglasses on his head. In person, he looked a little older than his photos, maybe by 2 or 3 years, but still him. We hugged awkwardly and sat down. He ordered an iced latte, I got a cappuccino, and we talked for about an hour. I remember how calm he seemed. He didn't fidget or ramble. He listened. He asked questions. He had that kind of voice you could play in the background while falling asleep. Not dull, just soft. He said he had a sister who lived in Oregon, a mom in assisted living, a dog that had passed last year. All of it made sense. Nothing sounded weird or off. We left after an hour and walked a bit through the neighborhood. At one point, we passed a bookstore and he asked if I wanted to go in. We browsed for a while. He picked up a copy of a crime novel I'd read recently and asked if it was good. I said yes, and he bought it. That stuck with me for some reason. It felt thoughtful. After that, we texted less often but still regularly. He said he was going on a work trip the following week, some conference in Dallas, and wouldn't be as available. That week, he checked in a couple of times, sent a photo from his hotel room, a blurry pic of the skyline. Nothing romantic, just updates. Then, slowly, the messages stopped. I sent him a few. Nothing needy, just hey, how's the trip? Or, hope your week's going okay. No response. I gave a few days. Still nothing. I figured he'd lost interest. It wasn't the first time that it happened to me, and probably not the last. It didn't hurt much. Mostly just confused me. After a week, I tried to look him up again on the app. His profile was gone, deleted or unmatched. I checked Instagram using his first name and the company he'd told me he worked at. Nothing came up. Not a single photo, not a LinkedIn profile, nothing. That's when I started to feel weird. Not scared, not yet, just unsettled. I sat at my desk one night after work and opened my laptop. I Googled his full name, Daniel H., the last name he'd given me. No results matched his face. I tried image search. Still nothing. I looked up the company he said he worked at. I checked their staff directory. No one with that name. I told myself maybe he used a fake name on the app. People do that, I guess. Maybe he didn't want co-workers to find him. Maybe he had a bad breakup and didn't want an ex snooping. 100 reasons. But a part of me didn't buy it. About a month passed. I stopped thinking about it as much. Life went on, work, errands, laundry bills. The usual rhythm of boring adulthood. Then, one Friday night, I was folding laundry on the couch with the TV playing in the background. The local news was on. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard the words dating app and murder. I looked up. They were showing a photo of a man. My stomach flipped. It was him. Same face. Same haircut. Same casual smile. But the name on the screen was different. Completely different. First and last. The news anchor said his real name was Patrick something. I didn't even hear the last name because my ears were ringing. He'd been arrested that morning in connection with the murder of a woman in another city, not far from here. They met on a dating app. He'd used a fake name. She'd invited him over to her place. Neighbors reported hearing yelling, then nothing. Her body was found 2 days later. Strangled. No signs of forced entry. Nobody. Just dead. I dropped the laundry and sat frozen for a while. I couldn't move. I replayed everything in my head, his voice, the way he sat across from me, how he held his cup with both hands, how he looked down when he laughed. All of it came back like a flood. And I kept thinking, what if he'd picked me instead? I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next night either. I went back through all our texts, all our messages, every photo he sent. I took screenshots. I wrote down every detail I could remember. What time we met, what he wore, what he said about his job, his family, the book he bought. On Monday morning, I called the police. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just said the truth. I had met him. He used a fake name. We went out once. He ghosted me. I'd seen him on the news. They transferred me to a detective. He asked me a lot of questions, how we met, what he said, if he ever came to my place. I told him everything. The detective didn't say much in return. Just took notes, thanked me, and said some of my follow-up. For the next few weeks, I kept checking the news. More information came out. They found photos of at least 3 other women on his phone. Some of them were recent. Some had vanished years ago. They didn't say how many, but they hinted it might be more than 4. I wasn't one of them. I kept telling myself that. I wasn't one of them. I changed the locks on my apartment. I stopped going to that cafe. I deleted all my dating apps. I told my friends, told my sister, even told my boss in case I needed time off. Some of them hugged me. Some just stared. Nobody knew what to say. What do you say to someone who had coffee with a killer? One night, about 2 months later, I got a call from a number I didn't know. I let go to voicemail. It was the detective. He said they'd confirmed my story, that my information had helped fill in some blanks. They'd found a receipt from the bookstore where he bought the crime novel. The time matched exactly with the day I said we met. They thanked me. That was it. In the months after, I started seeing a therapist. I had nightmares. Not about him chasing me or killing me, just normal moments. Sitting across from him at the table, walking past the bookstore, watching him pick up that book. It wasn't the violence that haunted me. It was how ordinary it all felt. How calm. How nothing felt wrong until it was too late. I never understood how people could fall for con men or serial killers. I used to think, how could you not know? But now I do. Because they don't come with warning signs. They don't come with music or red lights or glowing eyes. They come with small talk and coffee dates and soft voices. They come with fake names and quiet smiles. I'm careful now, not just with dating, with everything. I watch people more closely. I listen harder. I pay attention to the details, the things they say, the things they don't. I don't meet strangers alone. I don't let anyone walk me home unless I know them. I lock my doors twice, and sometimes when I pass by that bookstore, I think about that book he bought. I wonder if he ever read it, if he finished it, if he saw anything of himself in it. I haven't dated anyone since. I don't know if I will. Maybe someday, maybe never, but I'm still here. I'm still alive, and that's more than I can say for her. I had to be in the city for a weekend tech conference, Friday through Sunday. Nothing fancy, just a mid-tier event with a few panels and networking sessions. I booked my Airbnb a month ahead. It was a small studio apartment in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. The listing had good reviews, clean photos, and the host had a verified profile. It was close to the subway and within walking distance of the convention center. That's what I needed. I arrived Friday around 3 p.m. The host had left instructions for a keypad lock. No need to meet anyone in person. I entered the code, the door clicked, and I stepped inside. The place was nice, cleaner than I expected. White walls, hardwood floors, small kitchenette, a queen bed with fresh linens, and a sliding glass door that led to a little balcony overlooking the street. The fridge was empty except for a couple of water bottles. The bathroom had sealed toiletries, folded towels, and even a scented candle on the windowsill. The AC was already on, set to a comfortable 72. I remember thinking this host was really professional. The kind of person who ran multiple properties. Efficient, everything in its place. There was one odd thing. A large mirror mounted directly on the wall facing the bed. Not a decorative mirror or a dresser-mounted one. Just a big, rectangle slab of glass set into the wall, about 4 feet wide and maybe 5 feet tall. It didn't look out of place exactly, but it drew my attention right away. There wasn't much else in the apartment. Minimal furniture, clean lines, so the mirror just stood out. And not in a good way. I tried to ignore it. Told myself I was being weird. Lots of modern rentals have accent mirrors. Maybe it made the room feel bigger. Maybe people like taking selfies with natural light. I unpacked my bag, charged my phone, and walked to the conference center to check in. The rest of Friday was uneventful. I had dinner by myself at a nearby diner. Back at the Airbnb, I scrolled on my phone for a while, took a shower, and went to bed around midnight. I slept fine mostly, but Saturday was different. The day itself was normal. More panels, lots of walking, free coffee. I came back to the apartment just after 6 p.m. and decided to rest for a bit before going out to eat. I lay on the bed and stared at my phone, but I kept glancing at the mirror. The way it reflected the bed, made it feel like I wasn't alone. The more I looked at it, the more I realized I couldn't see my reflection perfectly. The lighting was off. Even during the day, the glass looked dimmer than it should. Not like a real mirror, more like a tinted window. That evening I ordered takeout and ate on the balcony. There were people walking below, laughing, riding bikes. The world outside felt normal. But inside that studio, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I felt watched. Not like I have anxiety watched. Something sharper than that. Focused, like a needle pointed directly at me from across the room. I tried to sleep early that night. Around 11:30, I got into bed and pulled the covers up. I turned off the bedside lamp, but left the bathroom light on with the door cracked open. The mirror stared back. I turned onto my side to avoid looking at it, but after a few minutes, I felt a pull. I turned back, still just the same dark reflection. My body, the bed, the room. But something was off. I sat up and stared at it for a while. Then I got out of bed and walked up to it. When I tapped on the glass, it gave a dull, hollow sound. Not like a wall-mounted mirror. No resonance. It felt like it was over space. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I turned on my phone flashlight and shined it around the edges of the mirror. That's when I noticed the gap. A tiny one, maybe the width of a coin, running along the bottom edge. The mirror wasn't sealed flush with the wall. There was a space. I leaned closer and tried to peek inside, but I couldn't see anything. For a few minutes, I just stood there. Then I reached for the edge of the mirror and tugged. It didn't budge. I tried again, this time gripping harder near the corner. It creaked. One side shifted slightly. It wasn't bolted to the wall, just set into a frame. I pulled harder, and the mirror came free. Behind it, there was an opening in the wall, a shallow cavity, maybe 2 feet deep. And inside that space, directly in the center, was a mounted camera. Small, black square. A single green LED glowing faintly on the side. There were wires running out the back of it and down into the wall, probably to wherever the feed was being sent. Below it sat a small shelf with what looked like a hard drive or maybe a network device. I didn't touch it. I couldn't even move. I stood there, staring into that hollow space, my heart hammering in my chest. For a second, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mouth went dry. I backed up slowly, still holding the mirror by one edge. I propped it gently against the wall and stepped away. I couldn't stay there. I threw on my jeans, shoved my laptop and chargers in my backpack, and grabbed my duffel bag. I didn't even bother folding anything. I left the mirror exactly where it was, half-propped open like a door to something foul. I walked out the door and locked it behind me, then sat in my car for a few minutes, shaking. I opened the Airbnb app and messaged the host. I didn't accuse them directly, just said I found something extremely concerning in the apartment and was leaving early. I requested a refund for the second night and reported the listing through the app. Then I drove to a 24-hour diner and stayed there until nearly 4 a.m. I couldn't bring myself to book another Airbnb. I ended up calling a mid-range hotel a few blocks away and paid for one night. Checked in, locked the door, deadbolt, and chain, and kept all the lights on until sunrise. I never heard back from the host. Not the next day, not the day after. No message, no refund, no explanation. But here's the part that stuck with me the most. By the time I woke up on Sunday and checked the listing again, it was gone. Just disappeared, like it never existed. Not just booked or unavailable. I mean, the entire listing had been pulled. When I clicked the old message thread with the host, their profile showed as no longer active. All the past listings under their name gone. I reported everything again, through Airbnb's help center, then through email. I even attached a photo I'd snapped of the camera before I left. But no one followed up. The most I got was a generic email saying they'd escalated my concern and were looking into the matter. Weeks passed. I never got a refund. The memory stayed with me. That green LED light, the mirror that wasn't a mirror, the sick feeling that someone had been watching, recording, maybe for hours, maybe longer. I started wondering how many people had stayed there before me, if they'd ever noticed, if they'd been filmed too. Some of them probably never even looked at the mirror, never tapped on it, never thought twice. I got lucky in a way. At least I found it. But what really gets me now, months later, is that the listing disappeared so fast. The profile, the host, the photos, all scrubbed within 24 hours. Like someone had a system in place. Like it wasn't the first time. I stopped using Airbnb after that. Now, whenever I travel, I book hotels. Big chains, real staff, front desks, and security cameras in the lobby. I pay more, but I sleep better. I still think about that mirror sometimes. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't checked. If I'd stayed another night. If someone had been watching me live, not just recording. And most of all, I wonder who they were. Because someone built that cavity. Someone wired that camera. Someone watched those feeds. And they're still out there. I didn't plan on driving that far. The trip was supposed to be a simple 3-hour run from my apartment to a town just over the state line. I had a job interview the next morning and figured I'd get there in the evening, check into a motel, have dinner, and rest early. Nothing complicated. I even left early, around 1 p.m., just to avoid driving after dark. Things started off normally. The highway was quiet, and the weather was clear, sunny but not hot. I had a couple energy drinks in the passenger seat, some snacks, and a podcast playing on low volume. After about 2 hours, the GPS alerted me to take an exit that would shave off about 20 minutes. I followed it without really thinking. At first, it didn't seem like anything strange. The new route took me down a narrow but paved road through what looked like farmland. Old barns, barbed wire fences, and the occasional rusted-out pickup truck sitting in the weeds. No big deal. The road twisted a lot more than I expected, and soon enough, I stopped seeing houses entirely. It was just trees on both sides, thick and dense, and the pavement started to crack in places. Still, the GPS insisted I was on the right track. It said another hour and 15 minutes to go. I was about 20 minutes into that route when I hit the first eater sign. Bright orange, blocking the road. Road closed, local traffic only. I didn't want to backtrack, and there was a handmade-looking sign underneath it that said, "Use County RD 117. I checked my phone. No signal, but the GPS still showed the map. Sure enough, County Road 117 was a small line just ahead and to the right. I figured it was fine. That was a mistake. I took the turn. The new road was gravel, then dirt, and then not even that. It was just 2 ruts carved through the weeds. My tires bumped and bounced. The trees pressed in close. I told myself to just keep going, that the road would open up again soon. The GPS still thought I was fine. 10 more minutes in, I passed a broken fence and what looked like a collapsed farmhouse. The roof had caved in. There was a washing machine sitting upside down on the front lawn, even though the lawn hadn't been mowed in probably a decade. I started to feel a little uneasy. Not afraid, just aware that I was somewhere I didn't belong. I kept going. Another 5 minutes. The road dipped down into a gully. The forest canopy above blocked out so much light that it felt like dusk, even though it was barely 3 p.m. I could hear something dragging under my car. Twigs, maybe. Rocks hit the undercarriage. I slowed to a crawl. The road was so narrow, I couldn't even turn around. Then the GPS said, "Signal lost." I tapped the screen. Nothing. I held my phone up. No bars. Just a spinning circle. That's when I started to worry. I drove for a while longer, maybe 15 or 20 more minutes, but it felt longer. There were no signs, no turn-offs, nothing. Just more woods and a sense of being swallowed up. I looked at my gas gauge. It was below a quarter tank. Not great, but enough to get me out, assuming I found a way out soon. Then I saw a house. It sat just off the side of the road, maybe 50 yards back. White paint peeling. 2 stories. The windows upstairs were covered in plastic sheeting. The porch sagged on one end. It looked abandoned. I slowed down, thinking I might be able to ask for help anyway. Even if no one was there, maybe I could use their land to turn around. I pulled into the clearing. The grass was high and soft. My tires left deep impressions as I eased forward. I stopped maybe 20 feet from the house and left the engine running. No movement, no cars. I got out. The air smelled off, damp and sour, like wet carpet. I walked to the porch and knocked on the door. It was wood old, the kind with vertical slats and a brass knob that didn't match. No sound from inside. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Then I noticed the door wasn't actually latched. It was closed, but the knob turned freely. I didn't go inside. Not yet. I backed up and walked around the side, thinking I'd find a driveway or maybe a mailbox, anything that would give me a clue about where I was. But there was no driveway. The ground behind the house sloped into a dense stretch of woods that looked almost black from how thick the shadows were. I turned to go back to the car and froze. Someone was standing behind it, not moving, just standing still, like they had walked up while I was around the side of the house. They were wearing a brown jacket, baggy pants, and what looked like a stocking cap, too far to see their face clearly. I stepped forward slowly and said something, I don't even remember what. Probably something dumb like, hey, or sorry to bother you. They didn't respond, didn't move. I felt something cold crawl up the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, just the first wave of adrenaline. I took another step and raised my hand, waving. Still nothing. Then they turned. Not toward me, just a slow turn like they were looking at the house. I backed away. I didn't run, just walked back to the driver's side and opened the door. Only then did the person look at me. Their face was off. Not wrong exactly, just vacant. No expression, pale skin, dark eyes that didn't seem to focus. I got in and closed the door, locking it. They took a step forward. I put the car in reverse and backed out as fast as I could without getting stuck. The tires spun a little in the soft ground, but I made it back onto the dirt track. I didn't even look back. I drove for a while, no clue how long, because I wasn't thinking clearly. My hands were shaking, and I kept glancing in the mirror. I didn't see anyone following, but I also didn't see anything familiar. The road kept winding, and the trees never let up. Then I saw another structure, this one much smaller. A shed. It was painted green, maybe to blend into the forest, though the paint was faded and flaking. I slowed down, considering stopping again, but something about it made my skin crawl. There was a metal pipe sticking out of the top, like a chimney, and some kind of plastic tarp nailed to the side like a curtain. I didn't stop. I kept driving. Eventually the road started to rise, and the trees began to thin. I saw sky again, gray and overcast now. The shadows were longer. It was getting late. I was almost out of gas. Then I saw another road, paved, a T-intersection up ahead. I almost cried. I pulled onto it, not even caring which direction it led. The tires finally hummed on smooth asphalt again. I checked my phone. Still no signal, but I didn't care. The road had to lead somewhere. 10 minutes later, I saw a sign. A real one. County Route 14. Then a gas station. A rundown place with 2 pumps and an old drink machine out front. But it was open. I pulled in and filled up, then went inside. The guy behind the counter was old, maybe in his 70s. He looked surprised to see me. You come from down that ridge road? He asked. I nodded, too tired to explain. He shook his head slowly. Ain't many folks use that way anymore. I asked him where I was. He told me. I was over 60 miles off course. He let me use the landline to call a tow service just to check the underside of my car. And while I waited, I asked if he knew anything about that white house. The man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, used to be an old boarding house back in the 50s. Got shut down. Code violations. Owner disappeared after some kind of investigation. Place was supposed to be demolished. I told him someone was there. He didn't say anything after that. Just looked at me for a while. I never filed a report. I couldn't even describe the man clearly. My GPS history didn't save because there was no signal. The car was fine, just some scuffs underneath. I made it to the motel near the interview hours later, around midnight. I didn't sleep much. For weeks afterward, I checked that area on Google Maps, trying to retrace my route, but I could never find that exact path again. Roads would appear and disappear depending on how far I zoomed in. The shed didn't show up. The White House was gone, but I know I was there, and someone else was too. I don't tell many people about it. When I do, they ask the same thing. Why didn't I go back? Why didn't I report it? Because I didn't want to be right. Whatever that place was, whatever that man was doing, he wasn't surprised to see me. He looked like he'd been waiting. I was driving through New Mexico, heading toward Flagstaff for a photography job. I hadn't booked anything ahead because I figured I'd just find a motel or something cheap on the way. But by the time the sun started to dip behind the mountains, I was already dead tired. My back was stiff from hours behind the wheel, My eyes were dry from the desert air, and the thought of another hour on the road felt impossible. I pulled over at a gas station, filled up, and started scrolling through Airbnb listings nearby. Most were too expensive or too far off route, but one caught my eye. It was a small cabin, a little outdated looking in the photos, but clean enough. Just off a quiet two-lane highway, nestled between some juniper trees. $70 a night, self-check-in, no cleaning fee. Seemed perfect. The listing had only a few reviews, all 5 stars except one buried way at the bottom. I didn't bother reading them too carefully. I just wanted a bed, a hot shower, and a roof over my head. I booked it, got the confirmation message with the address and lockbox code, and hit the road again. Another 30 minutes of winding blacktop later, I turned down a narrow dirt driveway. The trees got thicker, the road rougher. I almost thought I was lost until I saw the cabin come into view, half hidden in the dark. It was small, maybe 600 square feet, with a sagging front porch and a single outside light above the door. The bulb flickered a little, but stayed on. I got out, stretched, grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat, and walked up. The lockbox was right where the host said it would be. I punched in the code, grabbed the key, and let myself inside. The smell hit me right away, musty, like an old hotel room that hadn't been opened in a while. Not terrible, just that stale air smell, like the place had been closed up for a few days. I clicked on the light. The cabin was basic. Wooden floors, a small living area with a couch and an old TV, a kitchenette with a microwave and a coffee maker, and a hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. Nothing fancy, but clean enough. A few personal touches, framed black and white photos on the walls, a dusty bookshelf with a row of old Western novels, made it feel a little less sterile. I dropped my bag in the bedroom. It had a double bed, a plain dresser, and a single window with blinds pulled shut. The bedding looked fresh, the sheets folded down like someone had recently made it. I figured the host probably used a cleaning service between guests. The bathroom was small, shower, sink, toilet, but functional. I turned on the water to let it warm up and undressed. The hot water felt amazing after the long drive. I stood under the stream for a while, letting the road wash off me. No thoughts, just silence and heat. Afterward, I dried off, wrapped the towel around my waist, and went back into the bedroom. That's when I noticed it. My duffel bag was unzipped. Not wide open, but just enough that the zipper was maybe 5 inches down. I stopped, towel still in hand, and stared at it for a second. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I always zip it shut, especially when I'm not rummaging through it. But maybe I was tired. Maybe I had half opened it while grabbing my toothbrush and just forgot. That's what I told myself. Still, I walked over and looked inside. Everything seemed there. My extra clothes, camera gear, charger, toiletry bag. Nothing looked disturbed. I zipped it shut and told myself to stop being paranoid. I threw on a shirt and some sweatpants, heated up a frozen burrito I had in my bag from earlier, and sat on the couch. The TV worked, but only had 2 channels, some local news and a fuzzy movie channel. I watched part of some old Clint Eastwood movie with the volume low. My phone barely had 1 bar of reception. No Wi-Fi either, just silence, and the occasional pop from the wooden walls cooling down for the night. Around 10, I brushed my teeth, made sure the front door was locked, and crawled into bed. I remember checking my phone one last time. 2% battery, no charger plugged in. I turned it off to save what little juice was left in case I needed it. Then I rolled over, pulled the blanket up, and fell asleep fast. I don't know what woke me. A creak, maybe, or a thump. Something soft, but sharp enough to snap me awake. I rolled over and looked at the clock on the nightstand. A cheap, plastic digital one. The red numbers blinked 2:47 a.m. The room was quiet. No wind, no cars outside. Just that deep, full silence you only get out in the middle of nowhere. I started to roll over to go back to sleep, but then I noticed something that snapped me fully awake. The bedroom door was open. I never sleep with doors open. Always been a thing with me, even when I lived in dorms or traveled in hotels. I always shut the door all the way. I remembered closing it that night, even pushing it until it clicked. But now it was open, just a few inches, enough to see the hallway beyond. My heart started to pound. I didn't move for a long time, just listened. Every tiny sound felt magnified. I couldn't hear anything moving. No footsteps, no breathing. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I sat up slowly. My eyes were adjusting. The hallway beyond the door was pitch dark. I kept staring, expecting to see movement, anything. A shadow, a flicker, a shape, but there was nothing. Still, I didn't feel alone. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't grab my shoes. I just swung my legs over the side of the bed, picked up my phone and keys from the nightstand, and walked barefoot toward the door. Every step on the wood floor felt like it echoed. I moved down the hallway slowly. The air felt colder than before. The living room was dark except for the faint glow from the porch light outside. The front door was still locked. I checked it twice, then opened it quietly and stepped out. I didn't look back. I walked down the porch steps and across the gravel driveway to my car. My hand shook as I unlocked it. Once inside, I locked the doors, turned the key, and backed out fast. The driveway was narrow and rough, but I didn't care. I just needed to get back to the highway. Only once I hit the pavement did I feel like I could breathe again. I drove for an hour straight. No music, no lights, but the road ahead. Finally, I pulled into a truck stop, parked, and sat there until the sky started to lighten. I never went back for my stuff. I reported the issue to Airbnb, said I left early because the cabin made me uncomfortable. They refunded me half a night's stay, nothing more. I didn't push it. I didn't want to deal with calls or investigations. Later, once I was safely back home, I got curious and looked up the listing again. It was still active. Same photos, same price. I scrolled through the reviews more carefully this time. Most were glowing, shallow little notes about how quiet and peaceful the cabin was. But buried under dozens of 5-star ratings was that one. Just a single line. Asterisk felt like someone else was living there too. Asterisk. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't say anything else. No explanation. No details. But that one sentence told me everything I needed to know. Looking back now, I keep going over the details. The smell in the house, the unzipped bag, the open door. I think someone was living in that house without the host knowing. Or maybe the host knew. Maybe they rented it out cheap because they knew someone else had a key. Maybe someone lived in the attic or the basement. I didn't check either. I never even thought about it at the time. I just wanted to sleep. The more I think about it, the more things don't add up. There was a coat hanging by the front door that didn't match the weather. Too heavy for the season. I just assumed it was decorative. But now I wonder. The bookshelf in the living room had a mug sitting on top of it, filled with what looked like fresh cigarette butts. I don't smoke, and I doubt the host would leave it there for guests. The fridge had food in it, not the kind you leave for guests either. Half a carton of milk, a container of leftovers, a bottle of hot sauce with dried crust around the cap. I didn't notice it all right away. Only later did it occur to me how weird it was. It wasn't staged like an Airbnb usually is. It was like someone was living there quietly and just stepped out when they saw the reservation pop up. Maybe they watched from the woods. Maybe they never left. I'll never know for sure what happened that night. I didn't see anything, didn't hear a voice, but I trust my instincts. And something in that house felt wrong in a way I can't explain. Not paranormal. Not ghostly, just human. That creeping sense that someone was nearby. Close, waiting, maybe watching me through a crack in the door, or from the closet, or from behind a vent cover. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night now and check to see if my door is shut. Sometimes I check to make sure no one's living in my crawl space. It sounds crazy, I know, but once you've felt that kind of wrong, once you've stood in the dark and known someone was near you without seeing them, you don't forget it. You carry it with you. The Hendersons lived in a quiet neighborhood. A white 2-story house with trimmed hedges, wind chimes on the porch, and a swing set in the backyard. That Saturday evening, I was babysitting their 2 kids, Ben, 6, and Maddie, 4. I was 16 then, saving up for a used car, and babysitting gigs paid well enough. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson were going to a company dinner, not too far away. They'd be back around midnight. It was just after 6 when they left. Maddie had her teddy bear clutched to her chest, and Ben was already glued to the TV. They waved goodbye at the door, and I double-locked it after them. I always did that. The neighborhood was safe, but I didn't take chances. Dinner was chicken nuggets, apple slices, and juice boxes. I cut their food small and made sure Maddie didn't choke. After they ate, We played with Legos for a bit. Maddie lost interest fast and asked to color instead. Ben stayed on the floor, building some kind of spaceship. At 8, I got them both in pajamas. I read them Goodnight Moon and The Giving Tree. Ben always asked questions during stories. Maddie always drifted off faster. By 8:40, they were out. I left their bedroom door open a crack, turned on the hallway nightlight, and went back downstairs with the baby monitor clipped to my shirt. I settled into the couch, TV on low. I had homework in my backpack, but I wasn't going to touch it. I flipped through channels for a while. Then I heard the phone ring. It was the landline. Most people didn't call the house phone unless it was the Hendersons or maybe a neighbor. I got up and walked into the kitchen where the cordless sat on the wall. I picked it up. No one spoke. I said hello again. Still nothing. Just the faintest sound of breathing. Not heavy or exaggerated. Just there, like someone trying not to be noticed. I hung up. My first thought was telemarketer, but something about the breathing stuck with me. I checked the baby monitor. The kids were fine. Ben had kicked his blanket off. Maddie was curled into a ball. 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number. Same nothing. Just that breathing. I hung up quicker this time. I wasn't panicking. Not yet. But my stomach had that dull, tight feeling. Like something was off, but my brain hadn't caught up to it yet. I sat back on the couch. I lowered the TV volume even more. Every creak in the house felt louder. Another 15 minutes passed. Phone rang. When I answered this time, the voice spoke. "Have you checked the children?" It was a man's voice. Not deep, not whispery. Flat, like he was bored. I stood there frozen. Then he hung up. My hand was shaking. I checked on the kids through the monitor again. They were still in bed. I couldn't hear anything strange from their room. I grabbed my phone from my backpack and called the Hendersons. It rang 6 times. No answer. Next, I called 911. I told them someone was prank calling me while I was babysitting. The woman on the other end asked if I knew the caller. I said no. I told her what he said. She told me to keep the doors locked and that they'd try to trace the next call if he phoned again. I hung up and turned off the TV. The house felt huge when it was quiet. I sat at the kitchen table with the cordless phone in my hand, just waiting. It rang again 10 minutes later. Same voice. Same question. "Have you checked the children?" I didn't answer. I just listened. He didn't hang up this time. I could hear him breathing again. Slower now. Then I heard something else. Faint. A tap. 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 Like fingernails lightly drumming a surface. Then he hung up. I called the police again. This time I didn't care if they thought I was overreacting. I told them he'd called again. I told them he was watching me. I was sure of it now. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me. She told me to stay calm. I could hear her typing in the background. After maybe a minute, her voice changed. She asked me to confirm the address. I told her. She paused. Then she said, "We're sending a patrol car right now. Do not hang up the phone. Stay where you are." Something in her tone made my chest tighten. I asked her what was going on. She didn't answer directly. She just told me to stay on the line and keep myself safe. Another minute passed. Then she said, "The call." It came from inside the house. I didn't even respond. My knees buckled and I sat down hard on the kitchen tile. Inside the house, I could feel my throat close up. She kept talking, trying to calm me, but her voice sounded far away. My eyes darted around the kitchen. The pantry door was closed. The laundry room was dark. The garage door was locked. I remembered checking it. I stood up and walked slowly to the stairs. The baby monitor was still on. Ben was snoring lightly. Maddie mumbled something in her sleep. The line with the dispatcher was still open. She was saying the officers were 2 minutes away. I crept up the stairs, step by step, barefoot, so I wouldn't make noise. When I got to the top, I could hear something. A faint click. I stopped breathing. It was coming from the kids' room. I inched closer. The hallway nightlight made everything a weird orange color. The baby monitor caught it first. Static, then a burst of muffled movement. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a tall metal floor lamp from the hallway. I unplugged it and held it like a bat. Then I opened the kids' door. The room was still. Ben rolled over. Maddie was under her blanket. No one else. I checked the closet. Empty. Under the bed. Nothing. Behind the curtains. Just the window, shut and locked. I was starting to think maybe I'd lost it. Maybe the guy wasn't in the house. Maybe it was just some freak glitch in the phone system. Then I noticed it. The attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. It was slightly ajar. I stood there, holding that lamp, staring up. The hatch was about 10 feet up. The metal pull-string ladder was folded up tight, but the panel was cracked open half an inch. Just enough. The dispatcher was still on the line. I told her what I saw. She told me to get the kids and leave the house. Now, I didn't wait. I went back in, scooped Maddie up in one arm, shook Ben awake with the other. He was groggy, asking what was happening. I didn't answer. I just said, "We're leaving." Quietly, I carried Maddie. Ben followed behind me in his pajamas, clutching my hoodie. We went down the stairs slow. I didn't want to make noise. Every creak felt deafening. When we reached the bottom, I went straight to the front door and unlocked it. I yanked it open and ran out with the kids. We made it halfway down the driveway before the patrol car pulled up. 2 officers jumped out. One took the kids. The other walked me back to the porch. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. I pointed at the attic. They cleared the house room by room. 15 minutes later, one of them came out and said they'd found clear signs someone had been up there. Footprints in the dust, an empty water bottle, candy bar wrappers, and a burner phone. That was how he'd been calling me. He must have been hiding up there the whole time, maybe even before I arrived. There was no attic light, so they had to use flashlights. But they said it looked like he'd made a little spot for himself. A sleeping bag, a small pillow. The back door's lock had fresh scratches. He'd probably slipped in earlier while the Hendersons were getting ready, maybe while they were loading the car. He must have hidden in the attic and waited. He was gone now. They never caught him. The burner phone was wiped. No prints, no name, just that voice. That calm, bored voice. I quit babysitting after that. I kept having dreams of that attic door swinging down in the night, of opening a closet and finding someone standing there, just breathing. The Hendersons installed cameras after that. New locks, even moved a year later. But I'll never forget that night, because someone had been in the house with me, watching me, calling me, waiting.